Imagine being such a terrifying martial arts master that even after disappearing, people still talk about you like an urban legend with anger issues. Then one day, this absolute menace comes back, not to destroy the world, but to become a teacher. Yeah, because apparently the education system needed more violence. Demonic Cult Instructor Returns is basically what happens when the final boss decides to start giving homework. Bro teaches students the same way Asian parents teach math. Emotionally, spiritually, and physically devastating. Every training session feels one mistake away from becoming a funeral. 240 years ago, a massive interventional gate opened in the sky and then they descended. Those who would be called demons in the future. Upon their appearance, they declared their conquest of humanity. This was the beginning of the demon invasion. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, the Orthodox Alliance created the Orthodox Heavenly Demon Extermination Corps and declared their subjugation. 3 days later, they encountered a force of demons in Hanoi and were wiped out a year later. During this year, half the population of the Central Plain was killed. The Orthodox and Unorthodox were in forces united to form the last line of resistance in Sichuan. The battle lasted more than half a month. 90% of the resistance army was killed and the Central Plain was officially destroyed. The survivors became slaves and were taken to the demon realm. The protagonist Abby Gang was also captured and taken there. 5 years passed. He, who had been unable to use internal energy since birth, was classified as a rare species. After various experiments and brainwashing, he became part of the army subjugated to the Demon Kingdom. Decades passed after that, invading other dimensions and causing carnage. He killed, hacked, and destroyed. 70 years after he became a slave warrior, his merits were recognized and he became a commander among the demons bearing the name Squitz von Gretel. 120 years after he was promoted to commander, he finally found out about it. He wasted 50 years trying to find the conditions and ways to manifest it. And after 65 years, he began a rebellion for which he carefully prepared a week after the rebellion. Again, it failed miserably. The battlefield was littered with dead demons stabbed with swords and arrows. Beginning was still alive and now he stood before the Demon King Tarrant, breathing heavily. MC looked up at him and he drew his sword. Noting that it was such a disappointment, they risked all their savings for a rebellion of this level. He addressed Gang by the name Switz von Gruntal, which immediately angered him and told him through inch teeth not to call him by that name. His name is Sabi Gang. Tarrant paused for a moment, thinking about something, and said that he really didn't understand. He had been observing people like him all this time. Although his abilities and talents were meager, he always had a stubborn goal to survive, no matter the situation. This was his only strength. But why did he decide to act so recklessly after everything? He answered him. It was because he had to experience this at least once, so that the next time they fought, he could be sure of his victory. He had no choice but to fight him at least once. The Demon King remarked that it sounded interesting enough, but it was also a stupid way of thinking. Did he expect him to give him a second chance? He would die here and today? MC tensed his palm and all his fingers, shouting that he wouldn't let him kill him. Then with a mad grin, grabbed his chest armor and screamed loudly, trying to tear it apart. After that, a magical beam of light shot into the sky and pierced 3 magic circles. This glow emanated from the gang. The Demon King looked at him and said that this was a temporary regression, the power of Nazarin, the ancient evil god. Now everything was clear to him. The reason why he silently endured his defeat and humiliation for 200 years was all for this. He smiled widely and shouted that he would see everything soon. Next time he would prepare even more thoroughly and beat all the souls out of him. All the demons would die. Tarrant liked his mood and laughed, saying that he would look forward to it because he was the only person he recognized. After that, the glow intensified. An EMC disappeared somewhere in the Central Marine. Lane A quiet night passed, but the silence was broken by a roar. Lightning suddenly struck the roof of the building, punching a hole, and B-Gang was now lying on the floor among the rubble. As soon as he came to his senses and opened his eyes, he realized that 10 years remained until the demon invasion. Time passed, and it turned out he was at the Orthodox Alliance's martial arts academy. Specifically the Back in Spring Academy. Several days had passed since then, and 2 men came to repair the hole in the roof. One was nailing boards, and the other was holding them. And he said he couldn't believe lightning struck out of nowhere. His friend agreed with him and added that this lightning was powerful enough to destroy the roof of the training hall, but they should be glad that only this idiot was injured. The man didn't understand who he was talking about, and he told him that it was the assistant instructor. an orphan who was brought back by Dr. Jim Beck, the one struck by lightning a few days ago. He asked, is this the same martial arts instructor who doesn't know how to use internal energy? As far as he heard, he wasn't seriously injured. His friend chuckled and said that it would have been better if he had died then, because today would be his public execution. Meanwhile, all the academy students and instructors had gathered in the arena. Today was the duel for the position of assistant spear instructor at Dragon Spring Academy. As soon as the official start of the duel was announced, the students were delighted. On one side was the current assistant spear instructor, Su Bang, and on the other was his opponent, a contender who was recommended for the position of assistant instructor. The invincible divine sphere Manson Delka request was received to test assistant instructor Sabgang's abilities, so this duel would determine which of them deserves to be assistant instructor. They both had to fight, putting their honor as martial artists on the line. Sandy Hook slammed his spear onto the floor and told his opponent that he seemed better than he expected. He heard lightning suddenly strike him. He thought he was just making up some excuse to avoid fighting him, but since he had finally shown up, he would quickly put an end to it given his bravery, or he might just give. UMC said that in the very distant future, there was an instructor at the Arts Academy who couldn't use internal energy. Unfortunately, it was just because he was born with this peculiarity, but it couldn't be helped. He was naturally despised by others. In the end, this incompetent instructor, who was known as the shame of the Martial Arts Academy, suffered a terrible defeat in a public duel. He was expelled from his post and had to do menial jobs and assignments. He had truly experienced terrible days. Zodiac frowned and asked what kind of nonsense is he telling him. After that, began to spread his legs shoulder-width apart, preparing for a fight, and said that he had been waiting for this moment. For a long time, he called him a freak and beckoned him towards him with his finger, which immediately made the man angry and exclaimed, "How dare he act so arrogantly?" He stomped his foot so hard that cracks appeared across the arena, and he shouted that he wanted to leave him some of his pride because he was an instructor. But it was time to pay for his filthy mouth. After that, he used his martial art, the Demon Bull Spear, and rushed to attack. He screamed loudly, spraying saliva, and struck with the first form of his martial art, the Brutal Bull Charge. The impact raised dust, but something made him doubt. The feeling he should have gotten from his spear did not arise. When the dust cleared, he saw that the gang was no longer there, and his voice came from behind him. He said thoughtfully that although it looked decent enough, he had to hit the target for it to have any effect. Sandel immediately turned around, swinging his spear, and he jumped and dodged the blow, then landed nearby. The man gritted his teeth and wondered what just happened. How could he so easily dodge his technique, which he had practiced for decades? He was told that he was weak, but this was not at all like what he had just seen. MC clicked his tongue and remarked that it was so slow. How could he teach someone with such? Bill's Sunday, Ock decided that this couldn't be true. He was just lucky and gathering all the strength in his legs. He jumped high and pounced on him in midair, wishing him death. This time he decided to use the fourth form, the Falling Bull Kick, and Big Gang, following his gaze, adjusted his grip on the spear and began to spin it. He stopped, assumed a more comfortable stance, and his opponent shouted that there was no chance that this half-baked spear technique could block his strike. MC extended his hand toward him and a fireball appeared in his palm, which took Sunday off by surprise. He clearly hadn't expected this. Because of this, he couldn't react. A second later, the fireball struck him and an explosion echoed, sending a roaring sound throughout the area. Everyone watching the duel was in complete shock. Sandok fell and began rolling around the arena to try to extinguish the fire, and one of the senior instructors excitedly announced the end of the duel with the assistant instructor Sabigang emerging victorious. While his opponent was being doused with buckets of water, MC waved to everyone in the audience and reminisced about his past. He had been captured by demons drawn into their realm and had survived as best he could for hundreds of years in the process. He realized something very important. High-level magic was indistinguishable from martial arts. He turned to the seniors and asked what they thought of his martial art. It was called Fireball. Afterward, his charred opponent was carried away on a stretcher, and he waved good by saying it was a good fight, and everyone present began whispering. No one understood what it was. Someone in the crowd said that rumor had it that it was Hit Ryan's, Your Art. Meanwhile, one senior instructor was in complete shock. The second was more or less calm, and the third was downright furious. The calmest one congratulated the gang on his victory, but he thought he couldn't use his internal energy. He replied that he was just lucky. A few days ago, he ate an herb he'd never seen before, and suddenly he could use his internal energy. Unfortunately, he now has a lot of internal energy. Senior instructor Chelin Semyon exclaimed. What kind of joke is this? How can he even say such nonsense to his seniors? Does he want to insult them all? He replied that whether he believes it or not is their choice. But what does it matter? Did he cheat in the duel? It was a fight for a spear training position. But there were no rules stating that fighting had to be with spears only. He doesn't understand why he's being questioned. This when he won fair and square. Semyon became angry and the man next to him put his hand on his shoulder, asking him to calm down. He was too angry. After that, he told Big Ang that he was right, he won the stool. He wanted to say something else, but EMC raised his hand and apologized for interrupting him. But since everyone was here, he had one request. He thrust his spear into the floor and folded his hands in a respectful, "You're saying that he was asking them to conduct a test so he could be promoted to official instructor?" After everyone left, he decided to stroll through the academy. Everyone followed him with surprised glances, now known as the one who participated in the duel. The gang looked around and after examining the majestic building, thought it was the Dragon Spring Academy, one of many martial arts training halls created by the Orthodox Alliance. To prevent difficulties in Murim, the purpose of the academy is to cultivate martial artists who will become the backbone of the Orthodox Alliance in the future. They accept children aged 15 to 18 from sects and clans who are old enough. Instructors are martial artists from the Orthodox Alliance. They are divided into assistant instructors and senior instructors, but in order for assistant instructors to actually teach children. His thoughts were interrupted when he was about to enter his room. Genbok stood behind him, clearly puzzled by what happened in the duel today. He asked how he suddenly knew how to use internal energy. What did he do? Jinbike is the master of the Body Restoration Pavilion. He is not an instructor, but a doctor who takes care of patients. MC replied that as he had already said, it was luck. The man explained that this was complete nonsense. He knew that he had been treating him for a long time. Since the day he learned that he could not use internal energy, he tried every possible method to cure him. At that moment, his voice trembled, causing Bang to turn around, and he clutched his head, fell to his knees and cried, asking if it was something that could be fixed so easily, then how could he be such a useless doctor? Knows better than anyone that he was hated by others. Because of this, he is too ashamed to look him in the eyes. Now he began to apologize to him, and he froze. Then thought with a smile that he had not changed at all. For him, he is like a father. 542 years ago. That is 15 years. This man was the one who ran into the fire to save a dying child in the middle of an ambush by bandits. He's also the one who died on that fateful day, trying to save others. However, this time he will try to make sure he does not die. He took his hand and told him that he does not need to blame himself and not to worry about him. Genvek looked at him in surprise and with a smile asked him to trust him. He would solve all problems from now on. Night fell and he went to the window and looked at the moon in the sky, then tried to use his magic. Looking at the sparkling blue magic circle, he thought that when he regressed, he lost more than 90% of his mana. Now he can only muster about the 4th circle. It was such a disappointment. It took him hundreds of years to reach the 8th circle, but he should be grateful that he still had mana. That's right. He returned from that hell. Muriel's history was changed. The demons had not yet begun their invasion. However, the 3D word here is yet in exactly 10 years. The demons will begin their invasion, and when that happens, Merim will fall again. However, this time everything will be different because he still has 300 years of memories. Information about the demon army, such as the type of magic they use, the artifacts and weapons they have prepared for the invasion, and most importantly, how to defeat them. His face contorted. Rage, and he was distracted from his bad thoughts by Jin Baik entering his room. He told him that the vice master of the academy, Chian Semyon, was looking for him. He asked in confusion right now, and he asked him to convey this message to him. The pavilion master sighed and said that he did not mind, he was more worried about him. He thought it was regarding his request for a promotion. He should be careful. He was sure the test would be difficult. Since Man Sandak, the person he recommended, failed in such a way, he was sure he would not have any positive feelings towards him. In any case, why did he suddenly decide that he wanted to become an official instructor? Or? MC threw on his clothes and answered him with a smirk. But this was the first step to correcting the situation at this academy. After that, he left his room and headed towards the head instructor. Dragon Spring Academy was once famous enough to be considered the best of the top 3 orthodox martial arts academies. However, 2 years ago, the academy's master, also one of the top 10 martial artists, suddenly disappeared. The academy searched for him for 2 years without success, as it was difficult to replace such an experienced specialist. As a result, the academy lost its glory. He opened the doors and, walking inside, glanced at Simeon and thought that besides this idiot was the accelerator of the fall of Dragon Spring Academy. Immediately after, Chon Samsung said that he would ask this one last time. Was he seriously insisting on his request for a promotion? He confirmed this with a smile and thought that on the day of the demon invasion, huge rifts opened on all sides and previously unseen monsters began to kill everyone. Insight, panic, horror, screams. This was the beginning of the invasion of unknown creatures, which they later called demons. The academy's young students were mercilessly slaughtered by these monsters. That day, he saw Chon someone escape with Instructor Dung, taking with them a couple of chests and bags of riches. If the Vice Master hadn't fled first, if he had simply reported the situation, if he had activated the Academy's defense system, such a huge number of deaths would have been prevented. He still clearly remembers the screams of the students who were sacrificed that day. True, it hasn't happened yet because he returned to the past, but he will never forget its disgusting, ugly face. After his answer, Instructor Dunn decided to tell him about the test for his promotion. It was an attack on the Demon Knight Fortress B Gang. Slightly surprised and asked, does he mean the bandits in the mountains behind the academy? Semyon confirmed this and said that he needed to kill them. This was his test. The Demon Knight Fortress was a group of bandits located on an old sacred mountain not far from the academy. Due to frequent reports of damage inflicted by this bandit group, an order was given to attack them in the interests of civilians. This order was signed by the Vice Master of the Academy, and now he read it, after which he thoughtfully agreed to do so and asked how this related to the work of an instructor. Seeming answered that it obviously concerned the most basic requirements for an instructor. Senior instructors are the main force in the academy as well as masters of martial arts. The Lightning Blade Sword Technique Senior Instructor is Chun Semyon, the Tyrannical Tiger Sword Techniques Instructor, Stone Boyang. The Soul Haunting Arrow Archery Techniques Instructor is on Butch, and the Divine Swords Dark Shadow Sword Techniques Instructor is Sun Pelegi. All of them are officially recognized by the Orthodox Alliance and have achieved great successes such as eliminating the leaders of the evil demonic fighters or defeating bandits. MC was too lazy to listen to all this and interrupted him, saying that he understood everything. Herweine. How much time did he have? Buhang was angry that he dared to behave so rudely and was about to say something. But Samuel stopped him and told B Gang that he had exactly 2 weeks. If he was even 1 day late, he would forever miss his chance for promotion. He smirked and asked, 2 weeks? They would see each other in 3 days, by which time he would already be back? After that, he left under the furious. Layers of the senior instructors and Bulk turned to the Vice Master of the Academy, asking if he was really going to promote this insolent boy. He replied that he shouldn't worry. Their poor assistant instructor wouldn't come back from there. The man didn't understand what he meant, and MC meanwhile quickly headed towards the mountains and mentally called Samyang a lying idiot. He thinks he doesn't know what he's up to. Demon Knight Fortress. It was during this that the Green Forest Alliance began to enjoy glory. People don't know much about them yet. At the moment, they're a small organization. The real problem is their leader. Meanwhile, Semyon told the instructor about his plan and he asked in surprise, is he serious? The head of the Green Forest Alliance is a top-level martial artist. Semyon said with a smirk that the master of the Demon Knight Fortress Atcom is no ordinary bandit leader. Even the Orthodox Alliance believes he's actually the former leader of an unorthodox sect called the Heaven Destroyer sect. People believe he was killed by traitors several years ago, but in fact he managed to survive. He found and killed every single one of them. And the brutality of his revenge caused even the unorthodox Muram to place a bounty. In his head, he'd been in hiding and recently arrived here. Instructor Dong inquired how he knew all this, and he asked why he was asking. Begging certainly made an impression during the duel today, but that was only possible because he was hiding his true skills. However, this test is a real-life situation, not a duel. So he's certain he won't return alive. Morning soon arrived and MC was still on his way. Reaching the edge of a cliff, he used levitation and flew to a high mountain peak. thinking that if this act Gojam was as he remembered, then the fourth circle of magic wouldn't be enough to defeat him. The solution was simple. He would increase his mana and gather another circle as his experience and knowledge of magic had already reached the eighth circle. Noticing the right place, he landed and slowly walked forward along the path, then used search magic and his eyes sparkled with purple sparks. Using magic, he spotted a deep cave in front of him. An ordinary person would see a rock there, but in reality it was a barrier made of mana. He touched the rock with his finger, and seeing how the illusion reacted to his touch, he grinned and realized he was in the right place. No one could have imagined that there were several such places. Hidden behind mana barriers in the central plains, he passed through it and found himself in a cave with a glowing crystal in the center. He knew it would be here. It was a man of stone of special quality. Demons are intelligent beings from another world who repeatedly invade and conquer other dimensions. This became possible thanks to the technology of interdimensional travel. However, there is one significant drawback when passing through an interdimensional. The time required for living and non-living beings differs greatly. Even the demons were unable to solve this problem. Ultimately, they came to this solution in the worlds they planned to conquer. They secretly installed equipment they would need in the future. This stone is the source of their power. It restores their mana. For the inhabitants of the Central Plains, it is useless because they cannot use mana. At least that was this until now. He reached his hand towards the stone and the mana began to sparkle vigorously. After which, a few seconds later, a powerful beam of light shot into the sky, piercing the rock. Soon night fell. The bandits were walking through the forest, and one of them turned to the fortress master, doubtfully saying that he thought everything was all right here. Ujam asked with displeasure, "Does he say he made a mistake?" He excitedly answered him that he didn't mean that at all. After which the man ordered him to shut up and thoroughly search this place. He definitely felt an explosion of energy here. Losers like him will never understand this. Suddenly claps were heard behind them and they turned around begging, applauded him and said that he knew he really was a master of the highest order. He believed in him. Jim looked at him with displeasure and asked, "Who the hell is he?" MC was silent for a few seconds, then used magic and told him with a smirk that he was an instructor from the Dragon Spring Academy. The bandits were clearly surprised by such a meeting and began to discuss it among themselves, after which the fortress master called them idiots and ordered them to shut up. He took out his sword and asked if he was telling the truth, that he meant to say that he was the cause of that large energy blast. He asked in response, what if that was really the case? As soon as he said this, an energy strike flew at him and an explosion occurred, after which the bandit leader said that then he would kill him. That was the reason he was here. Begging asked, "Is that really true?" Hearing that he was still alive, he was very surprised, and then a cloud of magic flew at him, which he managed to block immediately after MC waved his hand using a mana blade to dispatch all of his subordinates in one fell swoop, leaving him in shock. B-Gang magically pulled the dead bandit sword to himself and said it was a coincidence he had come here to kill him too. Immediately after their swords clashed in battle, he blocked the bandit's strike and smirked, saying that he'd better avenge his subordinates. Jim became extremely angry and exclaimed, "Who is he?" They jumped apart, then drew closer again and began to strike and parry each other repeatedly, all accompanied by loud clanging sounds and glowing streams of energy. At one point, MC answered his question again, saying that he was an instructor at the Dragon Spring Academy, and Gujon, striking him again mentally, exclaimed that he couldn't believe it. This idiot. He's not resisting him at all. He let out a heavy sigh, then screamed loudly and released bright red energy, forcing Big Yang to increase the distance between them. His opponent used a divine art that shattered the sky and released the core. Gujon was furious that he dared to force him to use this power on him and asked if he even knew what it was. After being thrown off the cliff by traitors, he had gathered all this innate energy from the core. Dreaming of revenge, MC didn't let him finish and asked who asked him about this at all. Gujon was taken aback and said that he didn't care about the story of some useless villain. Only now did the bandit notice how pieces of ice were reaching out from his opponent's legs towards him, and had already managed to encase the lower part of his body. He looked down at his feet in surprise while MC cast an astral chain, Bell causing two portals to appear next to his opponent. Chains fell from them and bound his hands. Now he couldn't move at all. Ice was below him. Chains were above him. Gujon tried to break free from the shackles, but he couldn't and began approached him, saying that fighting was futile. The moment the chains touched him, they began to suck out his internal energy. This spell was specifically created to defeat martial artists. The bandits seemed trying to break free again and then asked where he learned such sorcery. Was he from a demonic cult? He sighed heavily and replied that he had already said that it was magic, not sorcery, but he shouldn't expect much from such an idiot bandit. Gujang cursed through clenched teeth and said that he didn't want to die in a place like this. He asked, so he had regrets. He confirmed it and exclaimed furiously that he hadn't yet gotten revenge on those idiots who manipulated his subordinates when he was still in the Heaven Destroyer sect. The reason he worked with those disgusting guys from the Orthodox Alliance, and the reason he was holed up on this mountain recuperating. It was all so he could get revenge. When he finished, the MC applauded him and said with feigned admiration that he was so determined. This is exactly how revenge should be. Slow, careful, without giving up the man. Trembled with anger and asked, was he mocking him now? What could he know? He was just a child who grew up in comfort. These words angered him, and in an instant he appeared very close to him, and with a dark, threatening expression, asked, is it really like this? His gaze made the man nervous and wondered what the hell was going on. He wasn't just another madman. There was something wrong with him. Bigan grabbed his head and said he would let him experience it too. The hell he'd endured for 200 years. He used magic, and when Gujan blinked, he found himself in a completely different place. A wasteland surrounded by rocks. He glanced around several times, trying to figure out what this crazy idiot had just done to him, and then noticed something huge behind him. A strange-looking creature that instilled terror. His eyes widened and his mouth dropped open in surprise. Then he saw explosions. Warriors fighting these creatures and heard their piercing screams, and then a battlefield strewn with the dead appeared before his eyes.
A few moments later, he found himself in some kind of room, surrounded by strange glass vessels, inside which people were imprisoned in a green liquid, and these unknown creatures were walking around.
Then he felt agony, pain, saw a huge eye in the sky and a pile of bones before completely plunging into horror. He saw a horned humanoid creature burning in a bright flame, but it did not harm him. Returning to reality, he grabbed his head and screamed loudly, trying to survive this whole nightmare. Soon, he calmed down a little, and while he was trying to catch his breath, MC asked how he felt about it. This is the future he will see in 10 years. Gojan reached out a trembling hand, grabbed his pant leg and bowed his head before him, asking him to kill him. The gang remained silent and he looked up at him, starting to hysterically beg him to kill him. He couldn't handle this. EMC took the sword and said that he understood, but someone had to do it. After that, he swung the sword and the bandit's life was over. Soon he returned to the academy. Semyon was very alarmed and at the same time surprised by his arrival. He looked at what he brought him and said that he couldn't believe it. In front of him was the bandit's sword and a bloody bag. Bang asked how he could do that. He thought that he wouldn't believe him if he brought only the sword, so he brought his head. After that, he folded his hands in a respectful gesture and invited him to discuss his new responsibilities as a senior instructor. A new day arrived. Semyon gathered the senior instructors. Discuss everything, Yo Engine. The senior instructor of fist techniques slammed his palm on the table and exclaimed that this was some kind of nonsense. Just a few days ago, he was the disgrace of the academy and now he's a senior instructor? What the hell is going on here in the UK? Turned to Instructor Dung and asked if he really attacked the Demon Knight Fortress himself. He replied that he had gone to the Sacred Mountain in the morning and found the bodies of the bandits as well as Act Gugum where B-Gang had said they were supposed to be. He didn't know how, but everyone except AKU Jim had been finished off with a single sword strike when Jen explained that that couldn't be true. He was the assistant instructor in spear technique and he was saying that he also hit his sword technique. This was nonsense. Fuang became angry and exclaimed in response, "He means his eyes." Received him? He can go and check everything himself if he doesn't trust him. The vice master of the academy ordered them to stop and asked what they were all doing now. They apologized to him and fell silent. After which he thought that no matter how he tried to understand, none of this made sense. AKU Gum was at least a top-level martial artist. He met with them himself and confirmed this when he conveyed the order from the Orthodox Alliance to him for beginning to kill him in one night along with all his subordinates. That's something even he, as a master of your rank, can't do. Maybe Jinbike helped him? He immediately dismissed the thought. After all, the old man wasn't that smart. He would have to consider this further. He turned to Instructor Dong and asked if he could still contact the Phantom Shadow Manor. The man frowned, realizing what he wanted to do. The Phantom Shadow Manor is one of the largest assassination organizations in Miriam. They are known for being willing to do any job if they are paid for it. Someone asked him to send them a request. Let him tell them to find out everything they can about B-Gang, as well as what he does every day. When Jin asked if he was really going to promote him to senior instructor, he told him not to worry, he had an idea. He handed him a scroll and he unrolled it, inquiring about it, and he told him it was a list of the disciples he would be responsible for after his promotion. His eyes widened and he understood everything after that. He laughed out loud and said that he expected nothing less from him. He had come up with such a wonderful idea. Samsung smiled reservedly and said that he would use his position wisely, after which the instructor said that he could quit his job before the ghostly shadows. The time to find out anything about him. The Vice Master allowed this to be possible because he had so little experience, and then turned to Instructor Dung and asked, he gave these lists to B-Gang, right? He confirmed this and clarified that he gave them to him right before the meeting. Semyon asked what he said, and he asked in response what could he know, even if he hadn't seen them. He simply smiled and said that he understood everything. Meanwhile, MC was heading to meet his students and thought that these old idiots were doing everything he expected them to. He had returned to this time and place for a reason. After learning of Netherlands' ability to return to the past, he had asked himself hundreds, if not thousands of times, what should he do to prepare for the demon invasion? The enemy was an army that had already conquered, countless dimensions being one. Arson had its limitations. He could do a lot, but ultimately the best he could do was gather an army.
Not weaklings like those who had died before his regression, but a powerful army that had mastered all forms of magic and martial arts.
And these were the children who were marked as problematic among the first years. He glanced at his students and thought that although they were undoubtedly talented, their personalities were holding them. Either they were untalented or they were neglected because they did not come from prestigious families. The elders thought he couldn't handle them, but they never imagined that among them would be two heroes who would excel during the demon invasion. One of them was a martial artist who had reached the evolutionary level in his 20s, the last hope of the Murim leading the alliance against the demons, the leader of the Heavenly Sword. The other was a talented marksman leading a squad specializing in assassinations and patrols, and he killed most of the demons. He was nicknamed the Divine Marksman, and these two heroes were now right in front of him. He smiled and told his students that it was a pleasure to meet them from today on. He was their instructor. Some time ago, the eldest son of the one-star sword clan, Tan Li Jun, a first-year student in the Camellia class, was beaten again by Gok Book. He struck him in the chest so hard that his breath was knocked out and he fell to his knees trying to recover. Gok Book is also from that class. The second son of the Dragon Tiger Escort Agency. He flexed his wrists and said that their martial arts training wasn't over yet. Let him get up. Lejeune wiped his drool and asked him to stop, and the guy grimaced in displeasure and asked what's wrong with him. Someone might think he was mocking him. He should be grateful he was showing off his mountain diving dragon tiger martial arts skills to a weakling like him. He replied that it was just fencing taught by his one-star sword clan, and Book smirked and mockingly asked, are these martial arts that he can't even use properly against him? He still wanted to continue learning them. Legion clenched his fist, clearly hurt by his words, and then the guy leaned towards him and threateningly ordered him to stop clenching his fists. If he's wrong, then maybe they should have another duel. Legion remembered his defeat last time and refused. After which Young Look Young, the second son of the destructive Swords clan, approached them and told him to stop. Exams are starting soon, so he should stop causing unnecessary fuss. Immediately calmed down and walked away, telling Legion he was lucky. Afterwards, the boy thanked his classmate, to which Legion remained silent and turned away. Legion looked down sadly, and at that moment, an assistant instructor came to them and said that this had happened suddenly, but the academy's vice principal informed him that they would no longer be studying in the Camellia class, but instead they would be transferred to a newly formed class. This news greatly surprised them, and soon they met their new instructor, Sabi Gung. The students reacted to this with obvious confusion. Books shouted at him to stop making things up. He had already suffered enough that they had to suddenly transfer to another class, and now they had an insufficiently qualified instructor. Did they really think he would listen to such stupid orders? MC gave him a disgruntled look and said his choice of words, and speaking to a senior instructor was rather insolent. Book furiously told him to go to hell and said he didn't know what he'd done to become a senior instructor, But he wasn't going to learn from a jerk who still couldn't harness his inner energy. Begging nearly chuckled in response, then used his magic and instantly appeared in front of him. The guy was very surprised, after which MC stomped on his foot with all his might, causing his eyes to pop out of their sockets and he screamed loudly. He said that Article 3, Section 5 of the Academy Rules states that if a student misbehaves, they can be punished for instruction. Book became extremely angry, gathered all his strength in his fists and attacked him, shouting that he was an ugly idiot. The EMC easily dodged each of his punches and accused him of using foul language and violence. Against his senior, as well as using internal energy during class without permission, he moved behind him, making him nervous, then punched him in the chest with such force that he screamed in pain, saying that the worst thing was his pathetic martial arts skills. After that, he began mercilessly striking him with his fists and finally kicked him in the legs, causing him to immediately lose his balance and fall awkwardly. The gang approached him and smiling, told him to get up. He wasn't finished yet. Legion, meanwhile, was shocked. He couldn't understand how this was possible. After all, this was the same Gok Book who ranks first among new students in martial arts training. He never thought he could lose so easily. Trying to get up, Book cursed at the instructor again, for which he immediately received a punch in the face. The other students became nervous and didn't dare utter a word. MC clicked his tongue and told his student that he had such a terrible condition during his very first lesson. Afterwards, he clenched his fist and said he was sorry, but the instructor's role was to hold back tears and educate. He swung and Book managed to panic and brace himself for the blow, but suddenly, Wookie Young grabbed the instructor's wrist and stopped him, saying that it was a bit excessive for a student. The gang looked at him and smirked, noticing that he had finally decided to act. He remembered what he would become in the future, and thought that he was the leader of the Heavenly Sword Alliance. Wilkie Young, first-year Camellia class, the second son of the John clan, one of the prestigious clans of the Central Plain. Renowned for their martial arts, at a young age, he was recognized as a martial arts genius within the clan, and even among the new students of the Dragon Spring Academy, he demonstrated excellent skill. His talent far exceeded the Academy's capabilities, and at the age of just 20, he achieved super fitness, becoming the youngest supreme martial artist in history, after which he entered the top 10 masters of the Orthodox Alliance. Originally, he was supposed to live a brilliant life, revered as one of the absolute masters of martial arts, and enthusiastically embraced by all. But that would have been the case if the demons had never appeared. From the very beginning of the demon invasion, he participated in more battles than anyone else, but soon the young clan became the target of concentrated demon attacks and was annihilated. All clan members except? They were brutally slaughtered. Despite this, he did not go mad with despair and grief. Like others, he traveled across the Central Plains, waging endless battles with demons, gathering survivors, and forming an allied force that surpassed both the Orthodox and unorthodox sects. Even in such a hopeless situation, when everything was against them, he led the remaining martial artists in a desperate last stand. He still remembered it. He always rushed to the forefront of the battlefield, and whenever he unleashed his blinding sword energy, even the enormous demonic beasts that seemed to cover the sky were cut down in the blink of an eye. Without a doubt, he was a hero and the last hope of the Central Plains. But now he's just another snobbish aristocratic kid from a prestigious clan. Began waved his hand away, and Wookie remarked that it was quite amusing. He smirked and asked in response, wondering if he was surprised that the assistant instructor, who until now couldn't use profound energy, had suddenly become so strong. He told him that of course it was unexpected, but all he could do with this newfound power was show off to his students. Meanwhile, Bloke clutched his head and, breathing heavily, said that it was such a shameful sight. And Wookie frowned and asked if this was also because of that fateful meeting. MC silently noted that he was quite good, then asked if he was curious if he obediently followed his teachings from now on. He could tell him everything. He thanked him for it, but said it wouldn't be necessary. He didn't know what tricks he used to suddenly change the student lists, but he would file a formal complaint with the Academy against the person responsible. He had no interest in learning from someone who acted arrogantly solely because of luck. D-Gang remained silent and watched as he and several other students left, casting hateful glances at him. Legion stood there and looked at them in surprise. And then suddenly the MC laughed and, putting his hand on the boy's shoulder, told Wookiee to look at himself. He talks like he's special. He thinks he can't give him anything? What if he tells him that with just 10 days of his training process, this guy can become strong enough to defeat him? Hearing this, Legion became very nervous. His words affected Wookiee Young. He stopped and asked with displeasure what he just said. B-Gang smirked and told him that he would repeat it as many times as necessary. After just 1 week of his training program, this pathetic weakling, whom he considers lower than an insect, will be able to knock him out with one punch? Legion looked up at him in surprise and asked, "What's wrong with him? Is he crazy?" The MC immediately shut him up and woke. Young turned around and glared at the instructor, then asked if he was really willing to take responsibility for those words. He confirmed it with a smile and offered him a bet. In 10 days, he and this guy would fight in an official duel. Legion tried to push his hand away from his face and started grunting indignantly, trying to say something, and B-Gang said that if this guy wins, he will follow his teachings without objection, and if he wins, he can do whatever he wants. He can make him leave the academy, apologize, or fall on his knees and beg. He will do whatever he wants. Look, Young chuckled and said that he didn't need anything from him, then left with the other students and said in parting that they better prepare for the duel. That would take place in a week. After that, the MC finally let go of this poor boy, and they both watched them go. After a few seconds, Legion realized the whole situation and grabbed his head with a loud scream, and B-Gang said that he scared him. The boy immediately turned his gaze to him, and a few seconds later, he screamed loudly again, and the MC noted that he was too noisy. After that, his student pounced on him with tears in his eyes and exclaimed, "What did he just do?" B-Gang noticed that he was so full of energy and asked him to calm down and let him go. He would explain everything to him, but the boy did not listen to him at all. He was terrified. He hung on his arm and exclaimed, "Why is he forcing him to fight? Woke Young, is he crazy? What did he do to deserve this?" He was fed up with all this and waved his hand, ordered him to let go, which caused him to. After which he said that it looks like today's class is canceled, so they are all dismissed. They left without any idea what was going on, and MCC waved goodbye, saying that the schedule for the next classes would be sent to them individually by tomorrow. Meanwhile, Legion was in complete despair, knowing he was finished, especially since it was a public duel. With a heavy sigh, MC turned to him and said that he simply had to win. Why did he think he would lose? Calming down, he sighed sadly and told him that during his first public duel after entering the academy, he lost to Book, and by that he meant he lost shamefully. Since then, he's been tormenting him every day, but even that monster couldn't land a single blow on Woke Young. He was completely routed. Begging thought about his words and noted that this guy was definitely capable even without the support of the UN clan. His martial arts talent was truly one of a kind. Lejeune became agitated again and exclaimed if he already knew this, then why he told him not to worry because he was stronger. Legion didn't understand what he was saying at all, and yet he knew that this boy would become a divine marksman in the future. But now Legion was weak and cowardly. He exclaimed that he resigned himself, that they really can't do anything about the fact that their class, the head instructor, suddenly changed. But why did he have to engage in a public duel with Wookiee? Young MC asked. He didn't understand what the matter was. He had to win the duel so he could prove his abilities. The boy exclaimed that it was his problem. What would he gain by being involved in this? He answered him with a big smile on his face that he would get an opportunity for revenge. He didn't understand what he meant, and he asked, "Didn't he say that that big jerk was beating him up? How did he feel when he beat him up recently? Was he excited? Did he feel relieved? Was it so great that he was ecstatic? Or was he angry that he couldn't get revenge on himself?" He said so himself. Even Bulk couldn't land a single hit on Wookiee Young. But what if he became so strong that he could defeat Look Young? And then he can easily get revenge on that idiot. How does he like this arrangement? Wouldn't this be a good gift for him? The boy fell silent, thinking about his words, and then said that if he really could become the strongest as he said, then he would be gang smiled and lead you, and confidently stated that it had nothing to do with bulk. He just wanted to become stronger than he was now. The instructor only grinned triumphantly in response. After that, his training began. MC sat on the roof of the building to get a better view, and his student, with the sword and stood in front of the dummy, the gang said that now they would test his skill level. Let him imagine that he was now fighting, Look Young, and using his martial arts to his full potential. The Jinn took a deep breath, collecting his thoughts, and then rushed forward and struck the scarecrow's head. after which he immediately turned around and swung his sword, starting to deliver countless strikes to it. He was tired and sweating profusely. The instructor ordered him to continue fighting with full force, and he attacked the dummy again with a loud cry. But at one moment, he felt something. All his strength disappeared at once, and he fell with a crash trying to get up. He began to breathe heavily, and the MC, after waiting a few seconds, called him a disgrace. The boy froze in place, and the instructor asked if he knew what his problem was through heavy breathing. He answered that for some reason when performing the basic movements, his internal energy kept dissipating. At first he thought he hadn't learned his clan's martial arts correctly, so he tried to check it several times. However, there were no problems with his basic movements. Then he thought that perhaps the problem was in his dantian or meridians, so he checked with a doctor in his clan several times, but still nothing. Perhaps he was simply talented. Or maybe he had some unknown disease. B-Gang grinned and said that it wasn't that, it's just that his meridian points are located further away than others. Hearing this, he looked up at him in surprise and asked, "What does that mean?" He jumped down to him and asked. He still doesn't understand. As he had already said, he was born with more distant meridian points than most. This is usually considered a rare condition that has more advantages than disadvantages. However, because he is still young and lacks internal energy, he faces this problem. He should know that all martial artists must expend the internal energy created in their dantian through their meridian points. But because his meridians are wider than others, his internal energy cannot be concentrated. That's why it keeps dissipating. Lejeune, dumbfounded, said that this was the first time. Heard about this, and MC, after a short pause as if remembering something, said that this was normal. He remembered how he fought among the demon ranks, and when he was already at the end of his strength, he met the divine archer. Now he told him that ultimately this is information that he himself learned by chance. The June felt a strange atmosphere and glanced at his expression, thinking, does he have some kind of story? B-Gang smiled and said that he will finish. Explanation, now that he knows the problem, they should fix it. He threw a hand on his shoulder and asked, hopefully, is there a way to fix this? He answered him that it is actually very simple compared to other people. They lack strength due to his distant meridian points, which means that he can solve this problem by increasing the amount of internal energy he has, since they cannot increase his internal energy in such a short period of time. There's only one method he can tell him right now. Legion assumed a fighting stance and concentrated, and the MC told him to continue gathering internal energy until he began using his basic moves. When he gathered enough of it, he would be able to reveal his true power. Immediately after his words, the boy opened his eyes, then rushed forward and swung his sword, cutting off the top of the dummy when he saw what he had just done. His face broke into a smile, after which he happily turned to the instructor and asked, did he see that his internal energy really doesn't dissipate? The MC said that he saw it with his own eyes, so he can rest assured before he fell. He didn't understand what he meant and happily exclaimed that he had never felt so energetic before. But before he could finish speaking, he immediately fell to the ground without realizing it, and as soon as he opened his eyes, he immediately began coughing and wondered why he fell by. Gang approached him and asked how he was feeling, to which he replied that he had no strength at all. He said it was a slight side effect of using all his power for the first time. He had never used his meridians properly before, so his unadopted body suffered a shock. But this was no cause for too much concern. The side effects would naturally disappear in a few months. Hearing this, the boy sighed with relief and then realized what he had just said. The duel would take place in a week after all time passed, and they began new training. MC began swinging his baton and said that he faced two serious problems when he uses a technique using accumulated energy. Everything he had collected up to that point is expended in one blow, because as he had already said, his body cannot withstand the recoil, and he falls. However, his energy core is also too small for him to accumulate energy and advance and retain it for long. If he does this, he won't just fall, he'll risk getting caught in an energy deviation, so it's forbidden. Everything's pretty simple up to this point, right? The boy doubtfully said that he understood everything, then pointed to the baton he was swinging and asked what that had to do with what he was holding in his hands. He told him not to pay attention to the little things. More importantly, let him think carefully with that in mind. He can only start accumulating energy after the duel has begun. How long did it take him to accumulate energy before he told him? About 7 minutes. And he asked then how was he going to restrain working during that time. The boy thought about it. He knew there was no way he could restrain him during that time and asked what he should do then. Touching the baton tighter, he pounced on him and said that there was only one answer. He needed to dodge as long as possible until he collected all the energy. Legion was slightly taken aback by the sudden blow, but he still managed to dodge it. Then exclaimed, "What is he doing?" The gang advised him to focus and begin gathering energy. He also advised him to keep his eyes on the opponent's weapon. He used illusion magic, causing even to see 22 clubs flying at him, causing him to miss the blow and take a hit on the head. Defeated, he grabbed the area where he'd been struck, and MCC said he was complaining even though he hadn't used any internal energy. "Let him get up, they will continue." The boy exclaimed, "Is this training?" He clarified that it is evasion training, and Legion asked why this training is so crazy. Bagong didn't like what he said and asked, "Does he think he is?" Doing this just to mock him, he simply explained why he is weak and how to fix it. He even clearly demonstrated it. Besides, he guarantees him. Right now, this is the only way he can reliably influence Wilkie Young in a week. Is the training painful and hard? Of course it will be. But is it harder than the times when he was humiliated by those two? Is he really going to miss this perfect opportunity to prove his strength to everyone? Treated him like trash. Legion remembered the way Wukin looked at him, after which he gripped the sword tighter and asked the instructor for forgiveness and suggested that he continue training. He can endure the whole day if he has to. The MC said he was making it up and would do this non-stop for the rest of the week. Seeing his smirk and the way he was warming up, the boy became very nervous, after which the instructor pounced on him, and he, horrified, asked him to stop. So the week passed and it was time for the public duel. Everyone gathered to watch. Look Young, as always, stood with an important air, and Legion was waiting for the fight to begin. Only he didn't look so good. One of the students, Joe Montauk, wondered how long Legion would last. Yongyan said that he would be crushed in one blow and fall to the ground. The girl frowned and asked, didn't he have any countermeasures prepared? The boy next to her said that he had seen him a few times when he passed by, but he just spent the whole week getting hit with a stick. Hearing this, Book smirked and thought that he was such an idiot. If he was trash, then he should just sit quietly in the corner. And this weakling dancing in front of him is going to beat Woke Young? This is complete nonsense. He fell for this scammer's trick and dug his own grave. Meanwhile, Look Young turned to the instructor and said that he had previously said that he didn't want anything, but under these conditions, he wanted to set his own conditions. The gang agreed and said that if he wins, he must promise to leave the academy. He never wants to waste time like this again. MC smiled and swore that he would do it, and then asked, he knows what will happen if he loses, right? He will have to attend his training. Losses without complaining, he answered him that he understood everything, after which the instructor smirked and asked, doesn't he feel like he's doing something wrong now? He should focus not on him but on Li Jin, who was standing there. He turned his gaze to his opponent. He had already prepared for the fight and was confident, albeit a little nervous. He concentrated, after which the instructor clapped his hands, drawing attention to himself, and said that victory would be determined when one of the parties surrendered, lost consciousness, or lost their weapon. Furthermore, any lethal or life-threatening strikes were strictly prohibited. In these cases, he, as the referee, would make the final decision. Waving his hand, he announced the start of the duel, after which they both drew their weapons and rushed towards each other. Before Lejeune could take a step, he lost his hand and watched in surprise. As it was thrown into the air and drops of blood flow everywhere, it turned out that it had all been just an illusion. His fear walking distracted him, ordering him to surrender, and he looked at his hands clutching the sword and thought, is he all right? His opponent called him an idiot. Did he agree to fight him when he was so shocked after his slight killing intent? The boy's whole body trembled with fear and he thought, is that it just now? This meant that if he wanted, he really could take his arm off. He closed his eyes and clenched his teeth. He was terrified, and he realized he couldn't do it. People considered this guy to be the best of the best in the academy, so there was no way a terrible person like him could defeat him. After only a week of training, the instructor's call distracted him from his thoughts. He immediately looked at him and saw his smile, as well as how he threateningly slapped his hand with a stick. Legion smiled nervously and turned his gaze back to his opponent, then closed his eyes and concentrated. He decided to remind himself that he wanted to become stronger than he was now. That day a week ago, why did he decide that he wanted to become stronger? Gathering his inner energy, he looked at his opponent and he sighed, saying that he had given him a chance to get out of this battle uninjured. After that, he bent his knees, prepared himself, rushed towards him, and jumped, saying that it was his own fault. He struck, But to his surprise, Lejeune reacted in time and blocked it. They increased the distance between them, and Lejeune nervously thought that this could end badly, that she had gathered almost dissipated. His opponent, meanwhile, used the first technique of the Supreme Dragon Sword, cutting the sky a stream of fury, and he saw many blades heading towards him. He tilted his head to the side, receiving a small cut on his cheek, and noticed that this sword she was so powerful. He took a few quick steps, dodging the blows, and wondered if it was just his perception. He seemed to find this attack easier to dodge than he expected. His classmates, meanwhile, were in complete shock. They did not expect to see such a thing. Legion noticed that he had learned something after all, and then used the third technique of his martial arts, Double Dragon Fangs. He pounced on Legion and saw two blades heading towards him at once, which made him remember his training with the instructor. He had used the same technique back then, but now he knew how to avoid it. He jumped high in the air just before the strike, and Wookie Young looked up at him in surprise. June then landed behind him, and as soon as he raised his head, he saw the enemy already approaching him. But he was able to react to this. He continued to dodge each of his attacks and thought that he was strong. He was also fast and accurate. He expected nothing less from the technique of the best swordsman clan of the Central Plains. However, this does not mean he cannot avoid them. He does not understand why. But this sword technique is definitely the one the instructor has been using on him all past week. Remembering his training, he dodged another blow, and Look Young was surprised. This time, he decided not to attack again, but simply retreated. Seeing this, everyone was shocked. They couldn't believe this guy did it. Listening to their surprised exclamations, Wilkin looked sadly at his hand, gathered his strength, and gripped the sword tighter. He apologized to Li Juin for calling him an idiot. He must admit that he had learned a lot in the past week. After that, he began performing another technique, which Li Ju immediately recognized a whirlpool of bright blue. She appeared above his opponent. It was his special technique? Brutal dragon slaying. He doesn't know how he knows about the Supreme Dragon Sword that cuts the sky, but if he can evade this too, he will admit. Feet, the whirlpool grew even larger, making the other students uneasy, and Book meanwhile asked in surprise what kind of terrifying sword technique was this, but seeing what Legion was doing, he was even more surprised. Despite such a terrifying technique, he confidently advanced towards his opponent. The day before the duel, he and the instructor had another training session when Legion was completely exhausted began. Said that he had been dodging well, so it might be doable now. He caught his breath and asked, will this really allow him to dodge all of Wookie's attacks? When he answered that it wasn't so, his mouth dropped open in shock, and MC said that Wookie Young wasn't an idiot. He was probably underestimating him now, but if he continued to dodge his sword strikes, he would take other measures. If he lasted until the end, he would most likely is the most powerful sword art currently available to him, and right now before his eyes was that very art called Cruel Dragon Slaying. It literally creates the impression that a fierce dragon has materialized and is a martial art that generates powerful sword chi. He couldn't dodge such an attack. Jumping or retreating would be pointless. It would grow and engulf the entire arena that day. Legion asked how he could avoid it, since he would be practically invincible. Bigen replied with a serious expression that nothing in this world was invincible. A storm of sword chi working together endlessly, moving in all directions, is simply what it looks like. It's not a perfect martial art. First and foremost, brutal dragon slaying is designed to destroy most enemies who are stunned by its incredible power and try to escape. The boy's eyes widened, realizing what he meant, and then McGee smirked and said there was only one way out. He needed to keep moving forward. And now, remembering the instructor's words, he walked toward his opponent, suffering small cuts from his sword. She, seeing him confidently walk toward him. Wilkin was surprised. The gang had told Legion that day that he would try to respond instantly, understanding that his brutal destruction of the dragon had been misread, but in this situation it would simply be a surprised reaction to what had happened. Then his moment would come when he lunged. He would need to dodge and use the suppressed anger he had been holding back for so long to strike this arrogant idiot. Watching himself being attacked, Look Young became very nervous, and then their swords clashed and his wooden weapon broke into several pieces from the impact. After that, Legion fell out of reality for a while, and when he came to, the gang was already next to him, keeping him from falling, and asked how he felt. He looked at him in surprise, not understanding what had just happened, and then turned his gaze to the students who were looking only at him and sincerely rejoicing at his victory, while some, on the contrary, were gritting their teeth in annoyance. The MC looked at him and asked with a smile, "It's wonderful, isn't it?" The boy froze in disbelief, then smiled and agreed with him. A new day had arrived and began headed to his first lesson, and when he entered the classroom, he saw the students sitting quietly in their seats, waiting for the lesson to begin. Legion was smiling slightly but woke. Young was displeased, but that was expected. The MC smiled and announced the start of the first lesson. Some time had passed since then, and the Vice Master was furious. He slammed his fist on the table and exclaimed, "Didn't they agree to this? How did this happen?" He remembered Wenjin coming to him with complaints and exclaiming that he trusted him and left everything in his hands. What does this all mean? Wasn't the goal for B-Gang to leave of his own free will? Why are the students following him voluntarily instead? What's going on? Especially Tong Legion from the One. Are Sword Clan and Yuan walking from the Yuan Clan? Both of these students now insist on continuing their training under B-Gang. Unbuckle suggested that he force them to change classes again like last time, but he immediately rejected the idea as they were threatening to leave the academy and report it to the Yonglan. Another senior instructor exclaimed that they should never have entrusted such a genius to some newbie. Right now, this is related to the academy's reputation. It's a critical issue and all their anger fell on the vice master of the academy. How is he going to take responsibility for this? Thinking back, he was furious that they were now trying to shift all the blame onto him. They were just parasites too desperate to win the Zhang clan's blessing. Had Wookiee Young really lost to some low-ranking brat from the One-Star Sword Clan? Leon had said that technically he had refused to continue the duel, but according to the students who had watched the battle, it was actually a defeat. Some Young exclaimed in displeasure. Did he even hear himself? Yuan Wuqiang was one of the greatest geniuses in history, even among the Yang clan. He gritted his teeth and thought that the more he got to know began, the less he understood. They couldn't leave him unsupervised any longer. He remembered that they still hadn't heard back from the Phantom Shadow Manor since they said they would consider their request. He clicked his tongue in displeasure and exclaimed, "How dare a simple group of mercenaries act so arrogantly?" At that moment, one of the mercenaries' voices rang out in the room, saying that they had better be careful with their words. Hearing this, both senior instructors immediately jumped up and started looking for him. That he was right behind someone, only now sensing his presence, he nervously turned around and wondered what this meant. He was a top-level martial artist, and he hadn't sensed him at all. He took a few steps away from him, and his subordinates appeared behind the mercenary who said that they were here to fulfill their request. Now let them tell them more about the Sabi gang. The instructors handed them his portrait and they moved to a more included place to talk, Shadow Hash 1. The captain of the mercenary squad asked, "Are they really spending so much money to investigate?" One rookie instructor, Hash 5, said that for a place with such a bad reputation, they seemed to be swimming in money. Number 1 said that it just showed how corrupt they were, but that it was none of their business. Hash 7 laughed and asked if these orthodox sects didn't amuse them. They always pretended to be universally virtuous, and now they secretly ordered the investigation of their subordinates. Hash 5 chuckled and remarked that they were no better taking on such pathetic requests for a small fee. Hash 1 called out to him discontentedly and asked if he had forgotten their mission. Until they found and subdued him, they were sworn to endure any dirty, despicable tasks. The man realized he had said too much and immediately knelt before him, begging for forgiveness, and he replied that there was nothing to worry about and that he should just focus on the mission. Hash 7 asked if they should also investigate this Jin Bake, the one who raised him since childhood. Number 1 rolled up the scroll and said that for now, they just needed to find and continue to observe the target. He asked if he thought the rumors about him having a fateful encounter were true. Number 1 told him not to take such nonsense seriously, but Hash 7 still doubted it. After all, they said that he allegedly didn't know how to use internal energy at all, and then became a martial artist overnight. If it didn't happen thanks to a fateful encounter, then what did it happen? Hash 1 suggested that he had hidden backers. Or maybe he infiltrated here. After being set by some hostile faction with dark intentions, that's probably what the clients suspect, which is why they hired them. That is, he could be much more dangerous than they imagined. Just don't let the target find out about them. They need to be extremely careful. Hash 5 laughed and remarked that it was such a funny joke. No matter how strong he was, he would never be able to detect the hidden techniques of ghosts. Hash 1 nodded and suggested that they begin the task. Evening came, MC came to the body recovery pavilion and met Jinbike at a scenic spot. The old man said that he had heard a lot about him at the academy lately. Everything they said surprised him. Is he sure he will be okay? It seems like people are really starting to turn against him. He replied that jealousy and envy always accompany the path of heroes. There is nothing to worry about. Jinbak smiled and said that this fateful must have been truly incredible. Who would have thought that he would change so much? Now that he thinks about it, it all probably started with that duel he was amazed back then by Gang. Laughed nervously, and the man said that if he had lost that duel, it would have been a disaster. The Academy's vice master was clearly trying to get rid of him. MC remained silent and thought that, to be honest, he really had been kicked out. For his regression after he was brutally defeated in a duel with Manson Delk and left unable to bear the shame. He wandered aimlessly for some time and didn't even have the opportunity to earn a living. Eventually, he became a warrior at an escort agency, despite still being unable to use his inner energy. He poured all his effort into training and physical techniques and spear combat, surviving countless dangerous escort attacks by unorthodox sects and bandits. After a few years, he became a first-ranked escort warrior. He spent over 10 years in this role, visiting every corner of the Central Plains and over time building a vast network of connections. Then one day he came to the academy reminiscing about old times, and that very evening demons invaded. Remembering this, he threw a stone into the bushes by the pond with displeasure, and the old man asked why he suddenly did that. He headed back to the pavilion and shrugged, telling him that he just saw an ugly frog and couldn't resist. Jinbike asked him to wait and asked why he wanted to harm that poor frog. Gang laughed and asked in response, had he forgotten how he used to catch and feed him frogs as medicine when he was little. After they left the pond, 2 mercenaries appeared from the bushes. Nearby Hash 7 grabbed his head cursing silently, and Hash 5 asked, is he okay? He said in a rage that this crazy idiot suddenly threw a stone at him. Could it be that they had already been discovered? Hash 5 asked in response. Would he have just left if he had discovered them? He was just unlucky. After that, he turned a displeased look on him and asked if he seriously doubted the estate's cultivation methods because of such a trifle. He excitedly answered him that this was not the case at all, and he advised him to be more confident in his skills. He returned to his quarters, so let him continue to observe him. MC, meanwhile, looked out the window and thought about what he had already done. His first goal after regression was complete. Was it finally time to bring her? If his memory serves him correctly, she should be somewhere around there. At this moment, he was interrupted from his thoughts by a knock on the door. He told his guest that the door was open, and Wookian walked inside, noticing that he was acting as if he had been waiting for him. The gang smirked and said that he thought he would start to get nervous by now. His student frowned and asked what was the matter. What was that disgusting expression on his face? After that, MC settled in more comfortably and asked what brought the young master of the Young Destructive Sword Clan to such a humble place. Look Young gave him a displeased look and remained silent, and he asked, is something wrong? His student was a little annoyed that he was talking to him while lying down, but he decided to ignore it and sighed heavily, saying that he came to talk about that dual Legion was able, albeit clumsily, to react to all the basic movements of the Supreme Heaven Slicing Dragon Sword. At first, he thought it was just the result of training. But now he realized that these were movements that went beyond instant reactions. It was as if he knew all the movements and trajectories of his sword technique. Gan smirked, and his student asked the one who taught him his clan's unique swordsmanship must have been him, right? How could an outsider know his clan's martial arts so thoroughly? MC smiled and asked who knows the Young Destructive. Lord Clan is currently considered the greatest clan in Jingyuan, quite famous among martial artists. Walking asked him to stop joking. This was definitely not a superficial level of knowledge. Did he really think he couldn't notice it being frowned and said that of course he should have noticed it? If he hadn't, he would have been very disappointed. His disciple became angry and told him to stop trying to change the subject, but he didn't let him finish and stood up, telling him to be more honest. If he wanted to be his disciple, that's not really what he was interested in. He came to see if he knew the same thing. He also felt the shortcomings of the heaven-cutting Supreme Dragon Sword, right? Hearing this book, Young was surprised. MC said that this technique was perfected hundreds of years ago and passed down within the clan as a unique swordsmanship. Currently, it is considered the greatest in Jiangyuan. It possesses incredible destructive power, constantly changing trajectories and sword movements, and has no gaps. But from his youth, when he began studying this art, possessing outstanding wisdom, he realized something. The Supreme Dragon Sword, which destroys the heavens, is not an invincible martial art, But as the heir of a great clan, he could not admit this look. Young clenched his fist and asked Dare. He looked down on his clans. Aerial Arts began said that he could think as he wished, but he had something to say. In the near future, there will come a day when these things will cease to exist. The things they martial artists revere so much, tradition, honor, nobility, and reputation, all of them will lose their meaning. Let him think only of one thing, that he must become stronger than he is now. Let him unhesitatingly cast aside everything that stands in the way of this. The boy remained silent, after which the MC walked away from him and said they would have time to talk about it in more detail later. But for now, let him follow his instincts. Look Young remained silent, considering his words, then suppose that it was possible. But something else was on his mind right now. Why did he suddenly grab that wooden pillow? Gang walked to the window and swung it, saying it was nothing special. Not to worry, just some annoying frog outside. Night fell. All three mercenaries gathered on the roof and their captain used his unique ability to observe their target from afar. He glanced at the master of the body restoration pavilion. Jambek and Hash 5 said that he used to be an ordinary medic working in Gamsu. But 5 years ago, he became responsible for the Body Restoration Pavilion and entered the Dragon Spring Academy. Despite his abilities as a medic, he had barely learned martial arts and didn't seem to have much experience in other fields. Number 1 said they had checked him out since he was closest to the gang, but he looked like an ordinary medic, and Hash 5 remarked that his impeccable past seemed a bit far-fetched. Noticing something, the captain asked him to wait and looked at Hash 7, asking what was wrong with him. Poor Hash 7 was all beaten up. He had received a lot of blows during all this time. Hash 5 looked at him nervously, then told the captain everything that had happened to. First, a wooden pillow fell on his head, then a rock flew into his eye, and then a small boulder fell on top of him. Number 1 was speechless for a second and then asked, are they sure they weren't discovered? Hash 5 said doubtfully that they hadn't been careful around them at all, so they probably weren't discovered. Hash 7 burst into tears again and said he thought they'd been exposed. The captain told him not to doubt their clans. He must just have a bad habit of throwing things around. He'd faced worse, so just let him be patient for a little while longer. The poor guy cried even harder and bit his lower lip, realizing he was going to get hit more than once, but he had to accept it. After that, they went back to stalk the gang and hid in the bushes. Hash 7 warned his older comrade that if something like this happened again, he wouldn't hold back. He would kill himself. The man said he understood how he felt, but he needed to calm down. They had moved out of the dorm, so incidents like this wouldn't happen again. Hash 7 asked, what if that crazy idiot woke up and suddenly decided to practice archery? At that moment, the mercenary noticed something and told him to shut up. They both hid in the bushes and MC left the building. He headed straight for the bushes. When he got closer, he started untying his pants and said that he felt so bad he must have drunk too much tea. Realizing what he was about to do, Hash 7 became very nervous and thought this won't happen, right? But fate was cruel to him, and a warm stream poured right onto his head, and his older comrade stared at him in shock. Covering his mouth, Hash 7 decided not to tolerate all this bullying and humiliation any longer and jumped out of the bushes exclaiming, what is he doing? Noticing what he was holding in his hands, he froze in surprise. It turned out he was pouring it from a teapot. Begging smiled and offered him a cup of tea, and the boy, realizing it was all a deception, burst into tears and said that he knew about them all along and had done it on purpose. Pulling out his hidden blades, he pounced on him to finish him off, and just as he was about to strike him, he activated a protective barrier that broke his knife into several small pieces. After which MC grabbed his face and slammed his head into the ground, saying that it was nice to finally meet the Phantom Shadow Manor. Poor Hash 7 was humiliated again. His comrade jumped out of the bushes and excitedly called out to him by gang. Said that this is what you get for meddling in other people's. Hash 5 reached for the sword behind him and was about to attack him, but the captain ordered him to stop and appeared behind MC, after which he respectfully greeted him and said that he didn't think he had actually exposed them already. EMC turned to him and said that he must be the leader of these frogs. Although, is it really okay to reveal your identity like that to the target of surveillance? He told him that it was a stupid question. If he killed him here and now, what problems would it cause? By gang chuckled and asked if he didn't wonder how he knew about all of them. He told him that they would figure it all out soon, then pounced on him and said that they would start by cutting off his limbs. He threw several throwing knives at him at once, but Gang seemed to have expected this. He used a mana blade and easily deflected. All the knives, and Hash 1 meanwhile appeared behind him. but he reacted in time and blocked the blow, saying that he would not let him do that. Number 1 pounced on him again, continuing to strike while MC blocked. He thought that although it lacked the overwhelming destructive power of Accu, it was fast, accurate, and deadly. Each technique was a fatal blow aimed at vital points in particular. The energy density contained in this sword was stunning. There was no way the barrier would withstand it and would not be able to continue parrying his strikes. He blocked another strike and they both retreated, and after a short pause, number 1 said that this was strange. He had a hard time understanding what was going on. But the power and style he used were fundamentally different from the martial arts of orthodox sects. It was impossible that he simply stumbled upon this power. Could this really be a demonic art? Beginning rubbed his neck tiredly and asked if he had ever seen a demonic art in person. It had been years since the demonic cult fell, so this was complete nonsense. It has nothing to do with it. Although he's right. It's not a typical martial art. One immediately released his energy and said that he now understands that he's not someone they can simply subdue. He doesn't hold any personal grudge against him, but he will have to take his life. He decided to use the Phantom Shadow Manner's martial art 100%, and preparing to attack said that all this is being done for the sake of fulfilling their mission. After that, he literally disappeared from the spot, and MC looked up in surprise and tried to follow his every move, but he was practically elusive. He quickly moved from side to side. It was a soul-destroying step and exclusive movement technique that, erasing all traces of presence, confuses opponents with its high speed. Then the strike is delivered too fast to be predicted. He took advantage of the flash of the Phantom Shadow and struck, causing Via Gang to immediately lose an arm. Number 1 was already sure he had defeated him, but it turned out to be just an illusion, and when the real MC appeared behind him, he turned around in surprise and didn't have time to react. He struck him in the face, causing his mask and hood to tear, and he himself was thrown several meters. His subordinate called out to him worriedly, and he, having recovered from the blow, asked how he did it. By getting approached him and asked, he prides himself on his stealth skills, right? But he clearly sees through him. It was all about his searching technique, with which he saw the emanating heat. He offered to talk to him for a while and called him the leader of the Origin sect, which surprised him.
Origin is a mysterious sect like a ghost.
They have never appeared at any official events. It is not even clear whether they are orthodox or not. Their true goals are shrouded in mystery. It's so important that decades ago, when all the sect members, including the leader, were wiped out during a massacre, most didn't even notice. Only those born and raised in the Origin sect, loyal to the end, knew the truth. They survived this tragedy and emerged under a new name, the Phantom Shadow Estate. Now they collect every scrap of information throughout Miram. They have become a top-tier mercenary organization that carries out all sorts of dirty and dangerous missions. However, all this is done for the restoration of the fallen Origin sect? This is the mission they all talk about, isn't it? Realizing that he knew everything, Hajwan, shocked, said that it was impossible. The true history of their sect is kept a closely guarded secret. In the past decades, no information has leaked out. MC said that if they complete all the missions he assigns them, he will give them information about what they've been chasing all this time. Hajwan shuddered. Excitement then clenched his fist and exclaimed, "How dare he spout such nonsense? They spent 20 whole years on this." They searched the Central Plains with just a shred of hope. All for their mission does even understand what exactly they are looking for. B-Gang told him that they are looking for the blood of the Origin sect. He immediately fell silent, not believing his ears, and MC clarified that they are looking for a unique bloodline that can completely inherit the sect's martial arts. There should be a strange birthmark on such a person's left wrist. Right? Hashwan looked at him in surprise and thought that he was right. This was the foundation of their sect's restoration. This is precisely the reason they wandered these lands for so long. But even in the Phantom Shadow Manor, only a select few know this secret. He asked how he knew all this, and B-Gang said that this was all he would tell him. Let him choose now. Will he accept his requests and obtain information, or spend the rest of his life tracking down the desired person? Alternatively, maybe they should continue what they were doing before. Number 1 thought for a few seconds, then reached for his sword, then put it behind his back and said that he accepted this task. However, if it turned out that he deceived them, he would regret it. MCC smiled in response and told him what he wanted. Soon night fell and someone invaded the Black Retribution Gang's base and dealt with all the bandits. It was a woman named May Solon. She sat on the gang's deputy leader, the Fist Demon McCoy, and brought her hand to his face. slowly taking away his internal energy. She said that after attacking this place with his subordinates a month ago, he killed all the men, took advantage of all the women. The surviving women tasked her with killing him. He cursed and tried to do anything, but he was so exhausted that he couldn't even move or gather his internal energy. He felt it slowly disappearing from his body and looked at the woman, thinking it was impossible. He asked if she wasn't afraid of what was about to happen. He was the deputy leader of the gang after all. She drew her sword and said that she had already told him about this. Seeing that she was about to kill him, he fearfully asked her to wait, and then he felt something foreign in his neck and let out his last breath. Having finished with him, she stood up and sighed heavily, after which she saw a white dove in the window. She held out her hand and the bird landed on her wrist. There was a note on its leg and she thought, "Is this the next task?" When she unfolded the piece of paper, she saw that the target, with the instructor of the Dragon Spring Academy subgang, a new day had dawned. Time for another lesson. Jerry Yang was practicing sword swinging and MC approached him, telling him to stop messing around and let off some steam. He hit him on the arms and legs with a stick and told him to spread his legs to the side and tilt his wrists slightly downwards. He needed to do 200 more times in this position. The boy stepped aside and, catching his breath, cursed loudly, after which began swung the stick at him and asked what kind of disrespectful attitude was this. Did he not like his teaching methods? He excitedly told him that it was not so at all before he hit him. Let him say what he wanted. He pointed at Wookie Young and asked why he didn't force him to do anything. He looked at the boy who was now standing in the arena and was very focused and said that he was doing fine on his own. His student indignantly said that he wasn't doing anything at all. Was he sleeping or something? After that, MC hit him with a stick several times and asked if he thought he was at the same level as him. He should shut up and use his sword more diligently. Jerryon continued training and he glanced at Work Young and mentally told him that this was good. He didn't need to be attached to the original sword techniques described in the Supreme Heaven-Smiting Dragon Sword. He should practice swordsmanship as his instincts told him his genius talent will help him reach a higher level. After that, Legion approached him and asked if he had completed his chief circulation yet. He replied that he hadn't finished yet. He was still worried. Could he really just do as he was ordered and circulate chi? He replied that there was no other way to solve his problem except accumulating enough internal energy. Unless he was hiding rare elixir? Secretly, he excitedly replied that of course it wasn't, after which Began walked away from him and said that in addition to eating and sleeping, he always needed to circulate his chi. The boy returned to his training frustrated, thinking that he was rushing things too much. He must have realized that he had only defeated Wookie Young in that duel because of his tricks, but that couldn't be helped. It wasn't a problem that could be solved immediately. Besides, he has more important things to do. 10 days had passed since he had given his assignment to the Phantom Shadows. If no one contacted him, his plans might be affected. He was distracted from his thoughts by the voice of Senior Instructor Dung calling him. Flicking his tongue into displeasure, he turned to him and said that he was glad to see him. Young noted that his reaction said something else. Why did he suddenly have that expression on his face as soon as he saw him? He answered that he was currently busy with his class and that he was disturbing him. The man exclaimed in response that he had just been loitering since early morning, but then immediately pulled himself together because he remembered how he dealt with the bandits. He said that he needed to go to the main hall. Immediately, the vice master of the academy wanted to see him. After that, he headed there, and as soon as he entered, Samuel said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. How was he doing? He answered with a smile that everything was very good. Being able to teach his students who possess such outstanding talents makes him feel the value of his work as a head instructor every day, and all this is thanks to the fact that he created class of outstanding students. Trying to contain his anger, Semyon cleared his throat and said that it was a relief. He was glad that he was doing well. But as far as he knew, they were a martial arts academy under the Orthodox Alliance since he became a senior instructor. Despite his lack of experience, the Alliance seemed to be having a lot of problems. He asked, "So are they interested in a lowly instructor like him?" He asked him to be more respectful. After which a woman entered the main hall. Greatly surprising the MC, and the vice master of the academy said that the Orthodox Alliance had sent an inspector to support him. The woman approached them and greeted B-Gang, saying that her name was May Sillen and that she had been sent by the Orthodox Alliance's inspection department. He was still in shock, and since he didn't respond to her greeting, she called. To him in confusion, he then laughed and apologized, explaining that he was captivated by her beauty. She laughed at the compliment and thanked him. After which Semyon said that Inspector May was a rising star among the women of the Orthodox Alliance. She was an incredible master who had reached the pinnacle at an unprecedentedly young age. He should not act rashly and do his best as a senior instructor, but he also needed to be careful and not show impoliteness to the inspector. B-Gang laughed loudly and said that he understood everything, then looked at the woman and remembered the task he had given the Phantom Shadows. He asked, "He knows a celestial maiden who takes souls, an assassin, right?" Hearing her name, Number 1 was slightly surprised and said that they didn't understand why he suddenly mentioned her. But of course, he knew her. She was a hired killer, working alone without connections or comrades. She was famous for never failing any mission she took on. He had never met her in person, but her victims were found with their lives sucked out. There were also rumors that she was an incomparable beauty. Was their mission to kill her? He replied that that was not the case at all. Let him call the Celestial Maiden here. To the academy. Hearing this, the man was very surprised, and MC ordered him to tell Chon Semyon that due to unforeseen circumstances, he had to cancel the mission. After that, the Shadow Captain went to Semyon, and when he learned that he wanted to cancel the mission, he slammed his fist on the table and exclaimed, "What is he saying? This is so irresponsible of him." One apologized to him, but he couldn't do anything about it, since an urgent matter had come up. Instead, he would introduce him to the person who was perfect for the job, as an apology. He would also pay the commission. At the moment, he agreed to be Chang's mission. He told him that he had already contacted her several times about his missions, so he could do it. But why would he do such a stupid thing? She is a ruthless killer. No matter how strong he is, she will still find a way to kill him. MC smiled in response and asked, is he worried about him? He exclaimed indignantly that if he died before giving him the promised information, he would be in a dilemma. B-Gang agreed that she was a very dangerous woman, which is why he needed her even more. Let's go back to the moment when he still is. Switz! The commander of the demon army staged a rebellion and attacked the palace. The demons fought each other. Meanwhile, he bombarded the palace with all the spells he knew. At one point, he decided to use a dual spell. Judgment Thunder and Void Cannon and bright red and blue streams of energy hit the palace, causing an explosion. After that, he stopped attacking and decided to catch his breath when the Demon King asked, "That's not all he has, is it? That's not all he has, is it?" Hearing his voice, he was surprised and looked down at him. Seeing that he was still full of strength, he had used 8th class magic straight up and there wasn't a single scratch on him. Tyrant ordered him to resist even more, otherwise he would be executed immediately, to which MC in a rage told him to shut up, after which he used an atomic explosion spell and a huge cloud of energy formed in front of his hands, which rushed like a beam at his enemy, the Demon King, extended his hand to meet it, and then a shockwave spread throughout the area. But this magic did not help either. The 9th class extreme destruction spell seemed to disappear when Tyrant touched it, but in fact, he gathered all of its power and directed it back. Realizing this, MC immediately enveloped himself in a protective barrier, but a powerful magical projectile easily pierced it and hit him. It all turned out to be his dream. You woke up and stared at the ceiling, trying to catch his breath, after which he gritted his teeth and thought that no matter how many times he experienced this memory still remains the most terrible. After that, he headed to class and thought that so far it seems he has conquered the highest mountain. After the regression, finding and ensuring the safety of Mei Solon was one of the most important priorities. His entire plan. The problem is that he did not know her exact location during this period of time. Fortunately, Xion Some-young and the Phantom Shadow Manor are moving exactly according to plan. In the future, even Li Jun and Wokyang, the most important forces, will not be able to match the abilities of Solon. When he arrived at class, he saw a bunch of children hiding and watching someone he hid next to them. And one of the students said that she was so beautiful. If a fairy descended from the sky, she would probably look exactly like this. Solon, meanwhile, was practicing. She got into the crane pose and closed her eyes, concentrating, after which she began to perform various movements, jumping from side to side and beautifully waving her arms. She stopped for a second and then began performing all sorts of movements again, after which she sheathed her sword and finished training. When she opened her eyes, she saw the children and the instructor who had been watching her the whole time. She smiled slightly and greeted the gang, saying that she waved the sword a little during morning practice. She hoped she hadn't distracted anyone. He replied that those were great movements. She said that she was actually planning to find him to talk, and the students behind him asked if she was talking to them. Following their example, McCaskey if she was talking to him, and she confirmed it and invited him to go for a short walk with her. He considered her offer for a moment, then agreed, and they went for a walk. He said she had remarkable swordsmanship, as expected of a member of the Orthodox Alliance. She smiled and said it embarrassed her a little. There were much more powerful martial artists in the upper echelons of the Alliance. He glanced at her and thought she was so shameless.
She was an inspector, but her whole personality was a lie.
Salon said he was impressive. She had recently heard that he won a public duel with one blow, even single-handedly defeating the infamous Green Forest Alliance. He looked much more like an incredible martial artist than she did. He silently noted that she had already done her research and told her it was just luck. He recently had a fateful encounter, so he has nothing to brag about. She said with a smile that she didn't think so because his students claimed the opposite. Although his methods may be a little harshly, he helps them solve their problems, never discriminates based on background, and is a truly wonderful instructor. He asked, is that really what they said?
What good children they are.
Solin said that she also noticed his hands. The shape of the calluses on his palms suggests that he hasn't let go of his weapon for over 10 years. Not even for a single day. He trained endlessly despite countless tears, and the tears and healing of his palms have happened so many times that he can't even count them. Only this way can one create such hands. He should be proud of himself. Not because of some fateful encounter, but because he is a true martial arts master. He looked at his palms at her words and remained silent, after which the girl frowned slightly and approached him, smiling slyly, saying that if she remembered correctly, he had never spoken in detail about this miraculous encounter. Could he please tell her about it? He sighed heavily and said that he had no choice, so he would be honest with her. The truth was, this power didn't come from some miraculous counter, and he didn't want that either. He had maintained all this time that it was a fateful encounter, because he had no other way to explain it. He mentioned the demonic spirit cult, causing her eyes to widen in surprise, after which he turned to her and asked if she had heard of this before. Immediately after these words, she grabbed him by the clothes and pulled him towards her, threateningly asking who he was and how he knew this name. Seeing how easily she fell for his trick, he covered his face with his hand and held back a laugh. Several decades ago, long before the demonic invasion began, there existed a powerful religious group, the Divine Sect of the Heavenly Demon. Simply put, a demonic cult. Those who followed the powerful teachings of the Heavenly Demon and joined the sect quickly developed their abilities to incredible levels, posing a threat to the central provinces, who considered the cult heretics and launched a decisive offensive. Ultimately, the greatest war in the history of John, who broke out a great war between the cultists and the Orthodox. Many powerful warriors perished in battle. As a result of the war, the Central Plane emerged victorious, completely destroying the demonic cult. Many years have passed since the sect faded into oblivion. To this day, peace reigns in the world, or rather, reigned. For reality is different. The followers of the demonic cult who survived the war secretly continue to exist as a demonic spirit cult, a fact unknown even to the Central Plains government. Only those who had personally encountered its representatives knew about the cult. Sealing, grabbing the protagonist by the robes, asked what his connection was to the demonic spirit cult. He recoiled in surprise and cried, "Oh my God, Inspector, what had come over her?" He would explain everything, but first she had to let go. She released him and he retreated, frightened. She apologized, and for a moment she lost control. He turned and said, "But something else is far more important." Judging by her reaction, Inspector May, she seems to know far more about the cult than rumors suggest. She remained silent, and then said Instructor begging the existence of the demonic spirit cult he mentioned is more important to her than anything else. Would he mind telling her in more detail how he learned about the cult? He smiled, then turned around and said of course. He'll explain everything to her, Inspector. After a while, they walked down the street and he said that right after he was officially dismissed as assistant instructor, pondering why he still couldn't control inner energy. He'd been walking outside the academy late at night when he'd been kidnapped. Solon was surprised. Kidnapped? He answered exactly. He didn't even know how to react to what was happening. As soon as he came to his senses, he saw before him a man he still couldn't forget. Then this man said that if he resisted, he would die as if he'd never existed. He must accept his fate and consider it an honor to serve for the great. Revival. The protagonist said that the masked man who spoke these words had a creepy voice and called himself a demonic scholar. Solon looked at him in bewilderment, her hands trembling. The protagonist continued performing all sorts of cruel experiments on him. forcing him to swallow unknown poisonous substances and performing operations that tore apart his body and internal organs in pain. Then he concentrated energy in his hand and said, one day when he came to his senses, he discovered he was completely alone in their shelter, and instead of internal energy, he could use true heavenly chi? She was surprised. True heavenly chi? He meant it! He clenched his fist and confirmed it, a power so rare that many don't even know it exists. To wield true heavenly chi, one must use one's own life force. Solon said, frankly, it was hard to believe that such a thing was even possible. MC extended his hand and said he doesn't have internal energy. How else would he use this power? If she wants, he can show her right now. It may sound ridiculous now, but she will have no choice but to believe his words. Even though the existence of true heavenly chi was questionable, the information about the demonic spirit cult was based entirely on his own experience, and with that, he could begin to approach her. He then turned around and smiling asked, does she still not believe him? Then she shouldn't refuse to come with him. He invited her to visit the place where he had been imprisoned, the place where he had been abandoned when he had awakened. No one was around, nor was anything they had worked on him with. But perhaps some traces of what had happened remained. He extended his hand forward and smiling said, but it would take a long time to get there and I've had enough. Stories for today, he thought. If she didn't mind, they should meet tomorrow night outside the academy and go there. He would take her. Then he watched her walk out the gate. Of course, it was all a lie. He had never encountered demonic spirit cultists in his previous life. His power is a kind of magic, completely unrelated to true heavenly chi. It's precisely this lie that's needed to harness it, and the lie in which he was able to tell her everything. Directly in his past life, he screamed loudly while lying on a table. Tubes and various devices pierced his body. Two beings stood next to him, one of them observing what was happening, asked what's the condition. His partner said that at first the response was a complete rejection of demonic energy, but surprisingly the receptivity gradually increased. Compared to beings from other dimensions, this is an incredibly rare specimen. The other demon said, interesting. By the standards of his dimension, he was considered one of the weakest beings. He must ensure that he doesn't die immediately, and he must continue to expose him to greater and greater amounts of demonic energy each time he replied. It will be done after some time. The protagonist was thrown into a room. Two men ran up to him, one of them shouting these demonic creatures, the other shouted, oh my God. They grabbed him by the arms and shouted at him to hold on. Then he coughed loudly. Solon came up to him and said they did a good job. She bet today would be the day he died. He looked at her and smiling asked really what a coincidence he bet she would be next. May Solon? She chuckled and holding out her hand to him said it looks like he's not going to die yet. Begang in the present. The protagonist walked forward, stopping on a path in the forest. He looks to the side and shouted, hey, get out. He picked up a stone and was about to throw it. But at that moment, a man jumped out of the bushes and shouted at him to wait. Don't? The protagonist threw the stone aside and said there's a reason why he pretended to take the bait and walked away. Did he really think he wouldn't notice if only one person was left to watch him? Shadow-7 put his hand to his head and said, damn, this is a bummer. After that, MC tossed him a scroll. He looked at it in surprise, then unfolded it and asked what it was. The protagonist replied that it was primarily a map with a detailed description of the required location and also contained information that would be useful once he arrived at the right place. At first glance, there's a cave hidden behind a rock. Once inside, he needs to trace the symbols from the second page everywhere. Can't figure it out, but he needs to do it by tomorrow morning. After that, Shadow-7 raised his hand and told him to wait. He says he wants him to go there right now and do it. MC smiled and said he guessed right. He asked indignantly, but why him? The protagonist, enraged, asked, what? The man suddenly jumped up and shouted, damn him. The protagonist put his hand to his mouth and shouted until tomorrow morning. While it might be difficult to map such a vast territory in one night, it was enough for the symbols to be visible to everyone passing by. From then on, everything would be under his control. After a while, Semyon, the senior sword instructor, folded his hands in front of him and asked how the investigation was progressing. The celestial maiden who took souls. Solon folded her arms and told him to call her my salon. Such a ridiculous address only evoked. After an awkwardness, he coughed into his fist and replied, I see he's asking for forgiveness. So had they managed to find out anything? Had anything come to light about the place he'd mentioned? She thought, frankly, such power was no blessing. She herself hadn't desired such a thing. Then she replied that she couldn't report anything definitive yet. To avoid confusion and obtain more precise information, she would need more time. He asked that the investigation be handled with the utmost diligence. It's clear Big Gang is hiding something. His recent actions have been inexplicable. If he's discovered to be a spy sent by some dangerous group, he could pose a serious threat to the Orthodox Alliance, Solan said. Whether he was a follower of the Orthodox Alliance or a demonic cult, frankly, she didn't care. But to ensure the operation went smoothly, she would check a few things. Just in case she approached and someone asked what she would check, she abruptly plunged the knife into the table in front of him and said, "Be gang." If it turns out he has a dark past or other motives, he won't mind if she slits his throat. Well, Asterisk frowned and thought. It didn't matter whether it was a lie or a trap. If it turned out he was trying to deceive her with such petty schemes, she would beat every word of confession out of him, and his death would be painful. And long did he understand. Sabi gang. The next morning, MC sat in a meditative pose, concentrating his energy. He decided to first focus on the middle energy core, where mana is regenerated. It had grown even stronger thanks to the high-quality mana stone he'd absorbed earlier, but he'd still only reached the level of a 6th circle mage. Wait, at that level he should be able to take on 1 or 2. Go to your martial artists, and the academy essentially had no one who posed a real threat, save for maybe one other person. Well, then he'd talk about his problematic lower core. Although it was very small, he could clearly sense the presence of internal energy, and there were no problems with his blood vessels and meridians. Martial arts or cultivation practice. This was the cursed constitution of the body he was born with. Even Master Jinbek said it was the first time he'd encountered such a constitution. But ironically, it was precisely because of this constitution that he'd survived and been able to reach this point. At the time, he'd only mastered a few basic techniques and the basics of martial arts, yet he hadn't been killed. Instead of dying, he was destined to become an experimental subject, all because of that damned rare constitution. And also, at that moment, Shadow Hash 1 entered the room and asked what he was doing. Was he cultivating his energy or something? He'd been up all night following his instructions, damn it. He was making him do all sorts of weird things. The protagonist turned around, looking at him seriously, and asked what exactly he'd asked him to do. He looked surprised, then drew his weapon and shouted, "Are you completely nuts or what?" The protagonist, pulling his shirt back on, said he was just joking. Okay, it was a joke. Good job. Now he should disappear from sight. So there was only one thing left to do. After a while, MC watched the training progress. Now all he had to do was show Seal in the cave he disguised as a cult hideout and feed her a convincing story. Although everything looks a bit sloppy, it's not that important after all. The cave entrance is hidden behind a barrier, directed by demons and to a martial artist. This looks like heretical sorcery, something only occultists could use. And now any information about the demonic spirit cult becomes paramount, because she hasn't managed to dig up anything about it yet. Even if she suspects him, she'll have no choice but to take the bait. At that moment, Seelan approached him, and he turned and said, "Good morning, Inspector." She said she'll go to the place he mentioned, which is supposedly connected to the demonic spirit cult. From now on, he'll selectively feed her false information, gradually fueling her desire for revenge against the demonic spirit cult. He smiled and said, "Okay, Inspector, he'll take her." He suggested meeting outside the academy tonight. She is a person he can manipulate at his own discretion. Not long before a man breathing heavily lay at Sullen's feet and clutched the swelling that had formed on his chest. The protagonist, running to the chest, shouted, "Hey there outside, it's urgent, come here." Those monster-like creatures? If they continue like this, he will die. And Solon told him to stop. It was too late. She covered the man's eyes. EMC squeezed them shut as two creatures grabbed the man's body and dragged him towards the exit. He crouched down next to Solon. She said, and now only the two of them remained. Are they the last martial artists? The protagonist said it's too early to say that. Maybe there are other camps like this. Perhaps there are other survivors out there somewhere. She sighed and said, "What a terrible life this is. It would be better to just die on the battlefield." He wants to know something extremely funny. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened to her. He asked if she meant a similar situation had happened to her while she was working in the Jianghu. She confirmed it, and looking down, added it was a demonic spirit cult. And she didn't think there was any point in telling him about it, since he wouldn't understand anyway. He asked what kind of ability it was. An energy absorption skill? Did she gain it as a side effect of her experiments? She looked at her hand where the energy was concentrated and confirmed it. This was the first time she'd shared it with anyone. The protagonist said he also found it interesting because the ability worked even on these monsters. He would never have thought it was the result of such experiments. So in the end, she managed to get her revenge. She answered, or rather, she gave up. In 10 years, she hadn't been able to find a single trace of the demonic spirit cult. She finally realized that the cult was an incredibly massive organization beyond her reach. Began, why did she willingly join this war? He replied, well, it was obviously for her own future and the survival of the martial artists. They locked eyes and then the protagonist said no. She confirmed he understood correctly. While everyone else was desperately fighting to protect Young-hoo from these monsters from another dimension for their future and survival, she acted like a complete loser who was too tired to live. But at the same time, she was so cowardly that she could not end her life herself. She joined the war only to find her death. But she never imagined that she would slowly die in such a place. MC told her not to give up. He leaned his head against the wall and added she shouldn't act like it was already over because they were still alive. He wasn't going to die in this dump just because his spirit was broken. Did she know how desperately he'd fought all this time while being treated like a cripple who couldn't even use his inner energy? So now that things had turned out this way, all they could do was grit their teeth and survive. If they could somehow escape these monsters, no ifs, they do it and then hunt down that demonic spirit cult or whatever and get revenge, he'd help her with that. He pointed a finger at Solon and asked, well, how is it now? Was there even a tiny glimmer of hope in her soul? She looked at him in surprise and asked, what was he even talking about? It was just a cripple who couldn't use his inner energy in the present. The protagonist was rapidly moving forward. He thought memories he'd buried hundreds of years ago were starting to resurface in his mind. It must be because he'd met her again after returning to the past. He gritted his teeth in irritation and thought, there's no time for meaningless emotions. The most important thing now was to ensure Silent's position. The piece on the chessboard, even if she still didn't understand her ability, it was one of the key conditions for defeating Tyrant. He wouldn't say anything about whether he was apologizing or whether she should understand. Please. He'd come too far to waste time on such feelings. Meanwhile, Solon stood by the tree, arms folded. EMC thought he'd come too far to waste time on such feelings. Walking further and looking around. Soan realized she'd searched the entire perimeter with particular care, but found no traps or suspicious signs nearby. Perhaps he planted something in the place he mentioned? And if not, was it possible he too had once been captured by the demonic spirit cult? At that moment, she heard footsteps behind her and said he arrived quite early. Although she wasn't one for small talk, the next second we sang, talk approached her and extended. Not long before, little Solon had been joyfully running through the snow, laughing loudly and shouting, "Snow! How cold!" Her father, watching her, laughed and said, "Oh my girl. She even likes this kind of weather." Her mother, standing nearby, said, "Child, she might get hurt. Be careful." The next second, little Sealon tripped over a protruding root and fell to the ground. She trembled all over, tears welling up in the corners of her eyes. She said she was in pain. Mom came up to her and said she sees. Mom told her, didn't she? Then she extended her arms to her and asked, can she get up in the present? Solon heard. Hey, fool. She needs to wake up. She opened her eyes sharply. She was standing tied to a pole. She remembered how she extended her hand to him and said he in front of her stood the head of the outcast. Young Black Payback, the true killing light. We sang talk, he said. The heavenly maiden who takes souls. He will avenge his brother, Wee Deo Chun, whom she killed. The Outcast Gang. Black Payback is a notorious gang that commits all sorts of dirty deeds, from theft and murder to kidnapping and slave trading. But she would never have thought that the gang leader and his deputies were siblings. She was too relaxed. Normally, she would never have found herself in such a situation. But to her misfortune, she stopped paying attention when she heard about the demonic spirit cult. Santa came closer and said that when he was told she had hurt his youngest, he thought she must have seduced him with her form. He was surprised that her martial arts skills were also quite good. That was why so much blood had been spilled, she said. How talkative he was. What was wrong? He also wanted to have fun like his dead brother. Wasn't that why he had gone to so much trouble to capture her? He grinned madly and said she was smart. True, if he had wanted to kill her, he would have done it immediately. He grabbed her by the hair and added that if the rumors were false, he would have finished her off with one swing of his sword. He never thought thought the celestial soul collecting maiden would be such an ageless beauty. He felt like he would be favoring heavenly pleasures today. Then Santak reached for the sword behind his back and added, but first he will cut off both her hands, with which, according to rumors, she pumps out internal energy. After he's satisfied all his subordinates here, he'll kill her, carefully stripping every bit of that beautiful skin from her bones. He pointed his sword at her and asked if he shouldn't at least do this so his younger brother could rest peacefully in his grave. She sighed and asked if this method wasn't too dirty to be called revenge. She thought, damn it. She thought she'd finally found the clue that would lead her to those idiots, but now she'll have to meet her death at the hands of those beasts? Well, perhaps for a mercenary blinded by vengeance, it was a fitting end. At that moment, Santek raised his sword above his head and swung it to attack his subordinates, shouting joyfully, "Loss! He has to cut off her hands, they have to start having fun already." It was time for them all to have fun. But before he could finish speaking, the protagonist's fist flew at him, severing his hand. Those present looked at him in surprise. Then the protagonist walked forward. Solon asked in surprise, "Instructor B. Dang?" She looked at his enraged face, and at that moment one of the gang members swung his weapon and, running up to the protagonist,
shouted, "Who the hell is he?"
"An idiot?" The next second, the protagonist used his haste to instantly appear behind the attacker, grabbing him by the neck and lifting him into the air, after which he said, do they know that because of them, the plan he'd been thinking about for hundreds of years almost went to hell? He clenched his teeth in anger, then used lightning strike. A powerful jolt of electricity coursed through the man's body. Those present watched in surprise. Cries of pain were heard, and a few seconds later, a charred body hung in the protagonist's hand. Another gang member asked in surprise,
"What just happened?"
Lightning Santak turned around and shouted, "Idiots? Why are they standing there frozen? They have to finish them off quickly." They charged, but the protagonist used blink. The man yelled in surprise, "What? What is this? Where had he gone?" The protagonist appeared behind him, pointed his finger at the back of his head and used air blast to capacitating the opponent. The body fell to the ground, dropping the sword from his hand. The next bandit looked in surprise at the approaching protagonist, swung his weapon and then attacked the man. After this, the protagonist looked at the remaining bandits. They looked at him in fear. He used the mana blade. The men trembled in fear, then screamed loudly and ran in the opposite direction, with the protagonist rushed forward at lightning speed, killing every bandit in his path. More and more bodies appeared around Sillin. Screams could be heard. He must at least spare his life. They begged him not to kill them. Seal and thought in surprise, was he really the same man she met 2 days ago? Then she shouted, "Careful," from behind. At that moment, Santak swung his weapon and attacked the protagonist from behind. He shouted that he must die, but his eyes widened in surprise when he looked at the sword, which had serrated edges. The protagonist turned around. Inside, he had used stone skin. The gang leader cried out in surprise. A protective barrier enhanced by chi energy. The next second, MC punched him in the face, sending him flying. He then used a gravity press, raising his leg over the man's head, clenching his teeth and saying that he had to die. The damn parasite? The man wanted to scream, but the next second, the protagonist still carried out the attack. A few seconds later, he stood in the resulting pit, surrounded by bodies. Then Solon called out to him. She was holding a weapon in her hands. She asked who the hell he was. He turned around and smiling said, "Oh my god, Instructor May, how lucky she is, safe and sound." He was so worried when he didn't find her at the meeting, so he went looking for her. His stalking skills are pretty good, aren't they? He laughed out loud, but she, continuing to look at him seriously, held the weapon in front of her. Then MC sighed. He made a mistake. At this rate, his original plan to control her with the information he managed to gather before the regression would fail. He never imagined that anyone would attack Solon at this time. What should he do now? Firstly, he simply cannot abandon her, and the reasons are obvious. May Solan is the most crucial element in the battle against the Demon King. Irreplaceable. As someone who fought against him, Demon King Tarrant could tell you that the most overwhelming ability of all was the nullification barrier, which nullifies all attacks, regardless of their characteristics or form. Without the ability to destroy it from the start, any further preparation becomes meaningless, and as far as he knows, only one being can remove this nullification barrier seal, when the ability to absorb an opponent's internal energy through direct contact. He's sure she knows only this too? However, The true essence of the skill lies in the ability to absorb and erase any concept. Of course, to reach the level of removing the Demon King's barrier, she needs to at least strengthen her abilities quickly since the information had leaked. He would subdue her immediately and then force her to do so. He gripped the hilt of his sword tighter, and Solemn screamed at him to stay back. If he moved a finger, she would kill him. Begging? Hearing his name brought back memories, especially when he remembered Siolan desperately begging him to open his eyes. Screaming. Could he hear her? He had to answer. The protagonist, Spotty, had changed. He lay on her lap, trembling with his entire body, his hands stretched upward. The demons watched from the screen. One of them asked, "Is he still alive? This must be such pain that it would tear his entire body apart." "But his fortitude is truly astounding," his partner added. "But his death is only a matter of time. After all, humans aren't the kind who can use magic. Can they really leave him to die like this?" His partner said he didn't care about him. They already had all the data. They could gather about this mutation, but he could become a threat if he survived. Better to throw him away now? The protagonist screamed loudly again, opening his mouth wide, sullen. Looking at him thought all the energy they pour out causes a rejection response. Were these creatures really planning to kill him? And the protagonist tried to pronounce her name. She answered yes, it was her. He asked her to kill him. He couldn't take it anymore. Her whole body trembled, and clenching her teeth, she screamed. He has to stop spouting this nonsense, damn it. He gave her his word that they would survive and take revenge together. She thought, no. Anything but that consciousness is slipping away. His body is disintegrating faster and faster. She remembered the protagonist's face and, closing her eyes, mentally apologized to him. After a while, the protagonist's eyes widened. Lying on the floor, he asked in surprise, "What? Ah?" Sitting up, he looked at his hands and wondered what had happened. The streams of various energies that had been battling inside him like they'd been washed away. He said, "What the hell?" At that moment, Sullen said she's glad to see he seems okay. He turned around in surprise and asked Sullen how did this happen. He looked at her in bewilderment and she said frankly she wasn't. Here she could do it. Her body began to change as well. He stood up abruptly and shouted. He slammed his fist on the ground and she told him not to waste his strength and just sit still. After all, just a few seconds ago, he was already 1 foot in the grave. She looked at her hand and added, ever since she discovered her power worked on those monsters, she realized she could absorb more than she thought. She somehow managed to absorb everything, but the energy was too alien, so she couldn't get rid of it. Maybe everything would have worked if she had unlocked this ability a little earlier. At that moment, the protagonist cried out desperately, "Crazy woman? Now is not the time for idle chatter." She's dying in his place. Why did she do this? She replied. He himself said that he shouldn't give up. Shouldn't he be held accountable for the words he said? Tears streamed down his eyes. He screamed, "Stupid woman, he said this so that she could live on. He never thought of such an outcome, and then she told him to live on, the gang. He must survive, and occasionally, please remember this, stupid woman." And one last thing. In the present, the protagonist sighed, then threw his sword to the ground and told her to calm down. She was in no danger. She asked, does he think she will believe it? How did he know she was being held? And those strange martial arts he used earlier? Were they really martial arts? Innate abilities? He didn't think she believed that nonsense, did he? Everything he said about the demonic cult was a lie from the start. Right? He had to answer questions. What was his true identity? He replied that if he answered that question now, she probably wouldn't believe a word he said. Instead, he'd tell her what he could do for her. She asked what that was. He raised a finger and said first, he would help her take revenge on the demonic cults. Second, he would make her martial arts and energy absorption abilities stronger than they were now. She looked at him in surprise and he added, third, he would take responsibility and protect her from all threats along the way, just as he had just done. In return, he asked only one thing of her. He extended his hand towards her and told her to stay here by his side and nothing more. Solon was surprised. Stay by his side? What kind of nonsense was he even talking? Was he offering to become his concubine? He closed his eyes and replied that that wasn't true. He meant exactly what he said. He would be in trouble if she got into trouble like this and suddenly died. She cried out in surprise. And why? Now that the truth was revealed, he was going to say any nonsense that, into mind, did he think she didn't know what he was going to do to her? He intended to tame her step by step and remake her to his standards, didn't he? He should run away into the mist, the pervert. or she would rather die. He asked, was she sure? Even if she took that step, would everything be all right? Her parents would be very sad, ran Ron. She looked at him, perplexed. A little earlier, Selene's mother, holding her baby in her arms, asked, what's wrong? The father asked if the baby had any problems. The old man said their daughter had no health problems. But unfortunately, this child was born with a very difficult and strange fate. The mother cried out in surprise. What? Why is he saying that? The old man asked if they had given her a name yet. She replied that they hadn't decided yet. The old man asked that in that case they named her Solon names of power, and then she would be able to survive even in the harshest frosts. After a while, Scylla, clenching her fists, cried out, Mom, Dad. They're so stupid, how could anyone believe such a thing? The father, smiling, said, of course they didn't believe these fairy tales, my daughter. They were just worried about her. So they couldn't do otherwise. The mother of the family raised her index finger and added so after leaving the elder. They discussed everything and decided that even though a real name had already been chosen, they would call her by a sweeter name during her childhood. She placed her hands on her cheeks and, leaning slightly, said that was why they had given her the nickname Ran. Until the harsh winter came, she hoped that she would become an orchid that glowed warmly in their embrace. Solon screamed at her not to say that, Mom. She was surprised, but she replied that they didn't need to worry about anything, no matter what happened. She ran. Ron would sort it out sometime later. She looked in horror at the fire engulfing their house and her parents lying lifeless on the ground. She desperately said, Mom, Dad. Then a man approached her and asked, so this child is the one with that rare nature? He approached her and asked, her name is May Solon, right? She was originally destined to live and die? Like weeds? She should know that she has been given the great honor of helping to bring about the great resurrection in the present. Solon pointed her weapon at the protagonist's face and asked, who is he? How did he know that? How does he know her name? Only her family knows that. He calmly pushed her weapon aside and said that she wouldn't believe him if he told her so. He didn't see the point. After that, he walked forward and added, he's told her all he could in the current situation. The choice is hers. After that, he sighed again and, opening the door from the room, said, but the promise he made earlier is not empty words. Therefore, he hopes that she will think everything through carefully before voicing her decision. After that, he walked outside and she looked after him in surprise. Then she remembered the moments that happened recently and said, what the hell? Sometime later, Shadow-7 was sitting on the edge of the table. Seeing MC enter the room, he stood up and, spreading his arms, asked where the hell he was wandering in the middle of the night. Had he even checked the work he told him to do the day before? Yesterday, he'd wasted a ton of time running around like an idiot for a task he'd assigned. The protagonist looked at him seriously and he ran fearfully toward the exit, saying he could see he was very tired. They talk later. After that, the protagonist lay down on his bed and said, damn it. As morning approached, he watched his students train. He thought naturally she'd just leave, even if it was revenge against the demonic cult. He was too suspicious and dangerous a person, so Solon would never trust him. If he were in her place, he would back off himself, deciding to conduct his own investigation. B-gang. What kind of stupid idiot? He's going to ruin the whole plan because of something that happened 200 years ago before it's too late. He should chase her no matter what. He was pulled out of his thoughts by So surprised. Face looking behind him, she shouted, Inspector? Hello? The MC turned around abruptly and Solon approached them. Looking at the student, she asked, isn't her name So Good Morning? Hello? Instructor saw smiling she apologized for disturbing him during class. But could he please give her a little time? He said in surprise. Inspector May Sillin. After a while, the students were practicing looking at them. The inspector suggested they switch to informal conversation and told him to extend his hand. Then she took the protagonist's hand and said there are no traces of internal energy in the blood vessels throughout the body. She thinks it's true that he can't use his inner energy. He asked if she believed him. She slapped his hand away and told him not to make her laugh. He told her so much nonsense and he thought she'd just go and believe him. It had all been a lie from the very first meeting. Hadn't it? About his innate abilities and about being kidnapped by a demonic cult? He confirmed it. He'd originally wanted her to investigate him. She folded her arms and said indignantly, idiot. So he'd gotten close to her from the very beginning, just to take advantage of her. Who was he? What were his goals? And how did he know about her past? She would have dragged all the answers out of him, but she didn't think he was the type to let his tongue out easily. so she let him deceive her one last time. The protagonist said frankly, he thought she'd just leave. She replied, of course, that's what she should have done. How could anyone trust the words of such a liar? She doesn't care about anything else, no matter what. He must keep his word regarding revenge on the demonic cult. If even this turned out to be a lie, she would kill him with her own hands. MC smiled and said that he promised to take revenge on them just as she desired. She closed her eyes and said if only not for that phrase he dropped at the end. She looked at him and added she thought about it all night, but she still couldn't understand how he knew her nickname. It's a secret. But even those idiots from the demonic cult didn't know. In her past life, Solon said she had one last request. In fact, her parents gave her a middle name when she was little. It was a happy time that didn't last long, which means Shining Orchid. Doesn't it perfectly suit her current state? So please let her remain in his memory as a beautiful memory, erasing everything that brings sadness and suffering in the present. The protagonist looked up at the sky and said that he had already told her she would never believe him. Hello. Her name is Knowing So she is a first year at Dragon Spring Academy, and now So is facing the greatest challenge of her life, a huge crisis that affects not only her but also the fate of their class. Several girls stood in front of her. One of them indignantly said, hey, commoner should stop dawdling and answer directly. Her friend pointed a finger at her and added if she decides to lie, she knows what will happen, right? If she doesn't want half her body blown away, she must tell the truth. Mock Danhwa, standing behind her, folded her arms and said that she must say everything without holding anything back. If for any reason their class does something that could tarnish the Academy's name, she will definitely take action, even if it means reporting it to the family elders. This girl is a freshman like her, only she's in the Flying Dragon class. Mock Danhwa, she's known as the Golden Jade Leaf. She comes from the noble Mock family, one of the most famous families among the Orthodox. In fact, she'd heard that the Academy receives enormous support from the noble Mock family every year. So what if she were to pass on something bad about their class? At worst, half of them could simply disappear. You shouldn't worry. Instructor began. She'll definitely prove their class's abilities and protect them from the evil hands of the noble Mock family. Not long before she'd been training, practicing her kicks. Solon, watching her, said, not bad. Her movements have clearly become smoother than before. She cried out in surprise, Inspector Sol, and adjusted a strand of her hair and added, but it took too much effort to make the turn. She should try to avoid abrupt transitions. This is Inspector May Solon. It had been about 2 weeks since the inspector arrived at the academy. At first she was a little worried because she'd heard that she was there to monitor their class, but after spending time with her, she was relieved to see what a kind and gentle person she was. After a while, the MC announced to everyone that there was an important announcement. He opened a scroll and, pointing to a letter, said that from now on, this would be the name of their class. Jarian raised his hand and asked, Special Task Class? What kind of strange name was that? The protagonist replied that they were a special task class because it was a class with a very important goal, one that no other student in the academy could achieve. Lejeune asked, and what is their class's goal? He replied, to protect the martial arts. In the Central Plains, this man was their class's homeroom teacher, Instructor Subi Gong. Despite his oddities, he was still remarkable and worthy of their master's admiration. Although the instructor was initially known for his complete inability to harness his internal energy, a month ago he surprised everyone by demonstrating his incredible and majestic cheese skills at a public event. He then quickly passed the promotion exam and became the instructor in charge of their class. They say it was some kind of coincidence, but sometimes it feels like he's become a completely different person. But ultimately, it's good for both the instructor and them, so everything worked out perfectly right at that moment. Solon folded her arms and asked, what the hell? She pointed at the protagonist and asked, he gathered his students and forced them to train? Is this some kind of child's play? He put his hand forward and said he was serious. Did she think protecting the martial arts world of the Central Plains was a joke? She asked, does he even have permission from the Academy's higher-ups to use that name? He walked closer and, folding his arms, said he thought he should go and report this right away. Will she go with him? She'll help him get permission? At first, they were both very polite, radius, and treated each other with respect. Lately, these kinds of petty arguments have been happening quite often. The inspector is unhappy with the instructor. No, it's more like How can I put it better? It feels like some wall has collapsed between them. What the hell happened between these two? At that moment, the girl shouted, "Stop! Enough of this unnecessary talk. Would it even be interesting to hear the love story of two instructors?" So, putting her finger to her lips, asked what they themselves said to tell absolutely everything. Then whether they want to talk about Dan was said about Young. Look Young. She didn't care about the others. She should tell her how Look Young is doing. She was surprised what? Oh, good, she thought. Why did she single him out? Young, Look Young. At first he refused to transfer to their class just like Danoa. But they know right that after arguing with the instructor, he decided to stay in their class, but there's really not much to say about him. They'll start by saying he didn't undergo any of the training they do. Donna asked in surprise what she was saying. The instructor was neglecting Wookie Young, so held her hands out in front of her and awkwardly shouted that it wasn't like that. She wondered why she was suddenly angry. Then she said while they were going through basic training, she saw him fight instructor Gang several times. As far as she knew, Wukong was the only one in their class who had crossed swords with the instructor. Besides, most of the time he just stood motionless in front of the scarecrow. The instructor even warned them not to interfere with the others' training, so he certainly wasn't neglecting him. Donna asked, "So we'll kill this completely happy with his situation now." So scratched her head and asked what she doesn't know about that stuff, but it seems he has no complaints after that. Danwil blushed with embarrassment and turning around said then that's enough. This time they'll see each other next time. One of her classmates told her to keep her mouth shut. Another girl added that she would be watching her from now on. Did she understand? So watched them go in surprise, then clenched her fists and joyfully shouted hooray. She protected their Special Forces class, mocked Danwa and Yun Wukong. Only later did she learn that they had been engaged since early childhood, and sometime later, Shadow Hash-1, releasing a dark aura, sat on the roof of a building. The protagonist approached him and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Hash-1. He turned around and replied, "Amazing." Because he used the most powerful concealment technique? The protagonist said, as he had said earlier, their vaunted techniques do not work with him. More importantly, since he'd come here personally, it meant the task entrusted to him had been completed right in case his visit was in vain. Before he could finish speaking, a bottle flew straight into his hand. He looked at the contents in surprise, and the man said that this related to the second point of the request he'd given him. He folded his arms across his chest, rose to his feet, and said first, "The exact location is unknown, but most likely somewhere in Hubei or Chongqing province in areas with sparse populations. Second, it must be an environment transformed into a heterogeneous and bizarre shape." His request was to find a specific location that met both of these conditions. He thought it would be difficult to accomplish given the vast search area, but it didn't take long to complete. And all because it was an impossible to miss spectacle. He should tell me what kind of place this is. Anyway, the protagonist looked at the creature in the jar and said he wouldn't believe it even if he told them. But if he put it simply, they saw a sign of disaster. With these words, he squeezed the bottle in his hands, crushing the creature inside. The demon race's invasion of this world would occur in 10 years. Looking back, he realized that lines of the invasion had appeared long before that. About 4 to 5 years before the invasion, strange plants and animals never seen before in the Central Plains were discovered. About 2 years before the invasion, mutated beasts began attacking humans. And 6 months before the invasion, people began suffering from mysterious and inexplicable illnesses, all of which were the work of demons by dispersing highly concentrated forms of mana across the Central Plains. They employed brutal tactics to alter the environment and transforming the battlefield into something favorable for themselves. Terraformation. That was the name of their technique. He learned about it later when he became their slave. So what about the locations where the earliest and largest interdimensional gates opened in the Central Plains? During the invasion, an entire city was destroyed in a single day. Afterward, the largest interdimensional gate ever discovered was discovered in Hubei. If all the facts are analyzed, the foundations for terraformation may already be laid. Of course, this was just a hypothesis. Now there is proof. The Central Plains are already gradually becoming polluted. So he went to see the situation with his own eyes and take countermeasures. After that, He created a magic circle over his hand, sucking in the remains of the creature, and said, "Excellent work, number 1. Moving on, he added that as he had promised he would receive the information from his subordinate in a few days, he would need a little time to detail all the data, so he would have to wait a bit. After that, number 1 called him over. The protagonist turned around and he asked what is his true nature. What did he know? Was he clearly hiding something? What did he want the protagonist? Applied that he had already spoken. If he told him now, he still wouldn't believe him, so there was no need to rush. When time had passed, he would tell everything even if he begged him not to. So he must wait for that moment now. Isn't it time for him to prepare to leave this damned academy? After a while, Semyon, drawing a symbol, spoke. "Senior instructor." "Dang," he answered. "Yes, Vice Academy Master," he asked. "Is the selection of those who will be sent to the Heavenly Combat Tournament doing well?" He replied, "Of course. They select from the Academy's most outstanding students from the Flying Dragon class, Lee, Big Yum, and Madawi from the Camellia class." Before he could finish speaking, someone asked if young Wilkin was still refusing to participate. He confirmed this. He had gone to him again the other day to persuade him, but he had claimed it would only hinder his studies. Samyang sighed and said that these so-called young masters are all the same. Bo Young stood up from the table and said they wouldn't dwell on it too much. Begum, while not as gifted as Wook Young, still possessed considerable talent. Didn't he seem? Young said that in any case, he must ensure that the selection process was carried out as strictly as possible, as he knew this was the Academy's most important event in the outside world. The Heavenly Martial Tournament is an event organized by the Orthodox Alliance involving the 3 great academies: the White Military Academy, the Heavenly Academy, and the Dragon Spring Academy. The most outstanding disciples from each academy gathered to test their martial skills against each other. The results are extremely important as they affect the Academy's standing in the outside world. Byung spoke up. "Academy Vice Master, are you sure they can handle this matter on their own? He knows the right to select participants for the Heavenly Martial Tournament belongs to him. Someone told him to stop worrying about such trivial matters. He knows it as well as he does. This demonic sword has absolutely no interest in such events in the outside world. He spent the last 2 years in his closed training hall, never showing his face. Here, he can assume they've been given tacit permission to handle everything themselves." He smiled awkwardly and said, "But if he says so." Then he laughed. The next second, the MC kicked the door open, walked inside, and shouted his apologies. "Oh, everyone he was looking for is here, the 2 of them?" Byung asked in surprise. "What's the matter? What unheard of rudeness, Instructor Bugong?" He smiled in response and said, "Good morning, instructors. As the senior instructor, he has a very important message. He and his students will be participating in the upcoming Heavenly Martial Arts Tournament." Semyon slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "What kind of crazy nonsense is this? Does he really think anyone will allow this?" The protagonist asked, "Why not? If he returns victorious, won't that solve all the Academy's problems?" He shouted at him to put his damn stupidity aside. "The Heavenly Martial Arts Tournament isn't some petty friendly exchange of pleasantries between warriors. It's a grand event that even the high-ranking martial artists of the Orthodox Alliance will attend. They can't send a klutz like him there." The protagonist sighed and asked if he considered him a klutz. He offered to see he instructor. Bo Yang was originally appointed to the selection, right? Did he really believe with all his heart that he was suitable for this role? He asked him, surprised in what sense. He replied, "A man with no real skills and lacking awareness. All he has is a pathetic feeling and age. He's just a fossil. For the sake of the younger generation, why not step aside and leave this place to others?" He indignantly shouted. What did he just say? Someone shouted. "Instructor, he needs to control himself." He turned around and indignantly shouted, "Vice Master of the Academy, is he proposing to endure such humiliation?" He shouted. Why is he allowing himself to be provoked by such a klutz? The MCC laughed and said, "What a shame. All this time he thought that a martial artist's worth was determined by his skill. But now he sees that some people prefer to simply look for an excuse." Byung indignantly shouted at him to shut his mouth. "He needs to go outside, he'll smash his face in." Simeon shouted Instructor Dung. "He needs to calm down." The protagonist smiled and thought, yes, that was exactly the answer. He wanted to hear if he publicly defeated Byung, Semyon would be disgraced, and then with a little more pressure, he could assume the role of overseeing the Heavenly Martial Tournament. The tournament was being held at the White Martial Arts Academy in Shanxi. Getting there from the Dragon Spring Academy in Jiangxi would take about a month. If they deviated slightly from the original route, they might even pass through the very place where Hash won and discovered the demonic zone. Of course, if it was a matter of verifying the facts, you could get there alone much faster. But that wasn't his only goal. If Semyon continued to obstruct him even after he crushed Byung, then he would provide evidence of all the corruption he'd been involved in. The next second, his eyes widened in surprise, a terrifying aura emanating from behind him. Byung flushed with anger, routed. What are they waiting for? He accepts his challenge? B-Gang, today is a must. Before he could finish speaking, everyone turned their gaze to the exit and he asked, what is he doing? Pilger approached them and said that he hadn't been here in a long time and he ended up overhearing a rather amusing conversation. He approached the protagonist and asked, he's saying that a martial artist's worth is determined by his skills. Yes, a true martial artist must have such fortitude. He's exactly what they say, young man. He likes him. The others looked at him in surprise. Then he smiled and said that they hadn't seen each other in a while. How were the two of them doing? Samuel nervously asked. What brought him here today? He asked in response. What kind of question is that? Instructor Chun? He's now saying that there's a place in the academy where he can't go. He replied that it wasn't so. Of course, it was an MC watching them thought he actually had the same question. Why the hell did he even show up here? Pilger smiled and told them to relax. He was joking. No need to look at him with such fearful eyes. The protagonist thought. After all, this man isn't interested in teaching others. He's obsessed only with honing his martial art. The most sincere martial arts fan. One thing he can say for sure, of all the martial artists he's met since his regression, this man is the strongest. Pilger said he was just out for some fresh air. Then he decided to check out some interesting rumors circulating around the academy. He heard they were discussing their participation in the Heavenly Martial Arts Tournament. Right? Someone shouted. To be precise, this young man suddenly appeared at the door and began making his demands. Pelia turned to him and said Instructor B-Gang, so he intends to represent their academy in the Heavenly Martial Arts Tournament. He confirmed this, but not only as a leader, he wanted to personally select the students to participate. Semyon shouted that this was complete nonsense. Pilger laughed and said how bold he was, saying that his students were stronger than even the best students in their academy. He replied exactly after that. He put his hand on his hip and said it hasn't even been a month since he became a senior instructor. Under these circumstances, insisting on participating in an official event like the Heavenly Martial Arts Tournament is too unreasonable. Byung shouted in agreement. Exactly, he's absolutely right. He then added, he himself said that martial skills are the true measure of qualification and determine the weight of a master. He was surprised. What did he mean then? Pilger clapped his hands and said, okay, here's what they'll do. They'll hold a public martial arts competition to determine the representative. Those initially selected for the Heavenly Martial Arts Tournament will compete against the cadets he nominated, and they'll determine who's stronger. A reasonable suggestion, Instructor began. If he's confident enough to nominate them as the Academy's representative, then they must be outstanding. Balance, right? After a while, Lejun shouted in surprise. What? What? What kind of sudden martial arts competition was this? And what about a selection process with Academy representatives as opponents? The protagonist scratched his head and said, well, that's just how it all worked out. The students screamed. No. What the hell is a Heavenly Martial Arts Tournament? He'd never even considered participating. What the hell did he even do without? Been asking their opinions? The protagonist folded his hands behind his back and declared that they were a bunch of ungrateful brats. He was giving them a chance to broaden their horizons, and all he got in return was criticism. Then Seolan approached them and said that this wasn't the first time he'd done something without consulting anyone. They wanted to hear the reason why he'd suddenly decided to participate in the tournament. He replied, well, of course he did. He wanted his glorious cadets to escape this horrible hole and see the wonderful wide world. She asked, did he just say horrible hole about the academy he teaches at? Memorized bookish training fights with no sense of tension to break free from the substandard education system? The next second, the student said enough with this nonsense. So is there a fight schedule yet? MC unrolled the scroll and said indignantly, the tactless brat. Of course there is. He just got it on the way here. Okay. He'll take a look first. Yom Jarion? He asked in surprise. Right, he was a first-year student in the Dragon Spring Academy's Special Forces class. The protagonist, Seteri? The fought is Settery. His opponent was Sung Cho-jin, a first-year student from the Wild Tiger class. Jerian grabbed his head and said, "Damn it." The protagonist asked what's wrong. He asked, "Do you know him?" Montag said that they first fought each other when they were in the same class. The whole process is difficult to explain, but no matter how many times he challenged him, he always suffered a crushing defeat. Jerian shouted, "Hey, it wasn't so bad as to use the word crushing." He added, "Anyway, he'd never been able to win." He replied, "That's true, but still." MC sighed and said, well, since he's been beaten, he should try to ask fool. Next is Joe Muntok, his opponent, the first-year student from the Flying Dragon class, Mop Danwa. He shouted in confusion. What? He grabbed his head and said that he couldn't believe it. He was finished. The protagonist asked in surprise who she was. It seemed he had heard that name before. Solon said, "Mokena is the eldest daughter of the noble Mok family. The family members are on par with many great martial artists." Jar Yang added when it was announced that some students would be transferring to this class, "She came here briefly." The protagonist asked that impudent girl who refused to study with them. So raised her hand and shouted at him, not to worry, Instructor Danwa is her friend. If she talks to her, the problem can be solved. He replied, okay. She should try, and he immediately called So to voice her opponent. So her opponent is a second-year student from the Wild Tiger class, Wang Yi. Who is that she says she knows? The eldest son of a man famous throughout the continent. He said exactly. He's also related to Instructor Bu Young. MC said yes, that is really brutal. Next is Young Look Young. He will fight a third-year student from the Flying Dragon class, Lee Big Young. The protagonist looked at him in surprise and asked what kind of reaction is that? Jerry Yang asked Instructor, does he really not know Big Yum? He is a senior famous throughout the academy, the best student among the third-year students? The protagonist asked who said he doesn't know. But what does that have to do with the fact that they tiptoe around him? He replied that he was the deputy master of the Lotus Sword Hall. This hall was founded by a branch of the Yuan clan. In other words, they don't get along very well. The protagonist asked, does that mean he's stronger than him? He replied that he didn't know for sure right now. The protagonist, that's quite enough. And lastly, Lee Jun, he excitedly said yes. MC said his opponent is the one who studied with him before in the Camellia class Gok book. He cried out in fear. Buck against him, is he kidding? The protagonist replied in the negative. It was the same book who had been acting like something and ended up on the floor. He heard him insistently asking to be allowed to fight with him. Lee Jun said in fear. Such a monster. Damn a setup. Montauk grabbed his head and said that now he would be humiliated in front of the entire academy. The protagonist placed his hands on their shoulders and told them not to worry about a thing. Dear students, did they really think their mentor would stand by silently and watch them be made fools of? However, they must remember one thing. No pain, no gain. With exactly 1 week left until the competition. Should they put in a little more effort than usual? Montauk said he didn't really care about winning anymore. He was happy with everything as is. MC smiling looked at him and said, but he wasn't really interested in his opinion. After a while, the guys were carrying huge boulders on their shoulders. The protagonist watching them shouted, next week the intensity of their basic training will be tripled. This is special training conducted. For a limited time, then So approached him and asked what about her instructor. He pointed at Solon and said that an outstanding, wonderful, magnificent, and true master, this one will be in charge of her training. She said, wow, how wonderful. Solon indignantly replied that she hadn't signed up for this, then walked on, stepped forward and said that he would train on his own as always. The MC waved his hand and said, okay, he believed in him. Then Legion approached him and asked him to listen. Instructor? Maybe he also needed some special training? The protagonist replied negatively. He should continue practicing his breathing technique, he said desperately. But in this situation, isn't it time to teach him something new? The MC asked how many times he should repeat this. This is the only way for him to get stronger as quickly as possible. He wanted to object. Still, the protagonist sighed and noticed that he was so stubborn today. What's wrong? Is it because Book has become his rival? He should stop shaking in fear for no particular reason? After all, he was the one who managed to defeat even Look Young. Then the protagonist approached Solon and pointing a finger at the student, said, Inspector, he asks you to keep an eye on those idiots from time to time. She shouted indignantly. What for? What reason and where is he going? In the middle of class? You? He raised his index finger and replied that he urgently needed to pop in somewhere if anyone was looking for him. She should think of something. Ciao. The next second, he began to disappear and she reached out to him and shouted at him to wait. She thought indignantly, what a asterisk. So he asked her to stay close so he could manipulate her. Then So-So approached her and joyfully shouted, Inspector, which training session will they start with? After a while, Legion assumed a meditative pose, concentrating his energy in his chest and sighing heavily. Recalling the instructor's words, he thought that it wasn't so. Now it was perfectly clear to him too. The reason he'd been able to defeat Wook Young during that duel was because his instructor had shown him his opponent's entire sword technique beforehand. If they were to clash again, he'd never be able to defeat him. He looked at his hand and thought, sure, his internal energy had clearly increased compared to before, but now the development process was gradually slowing. In a week, right in front of everyone, he would have to fight Book with his training, be enough to defeat him. Then he glanced in surprise at the door of the hall where he could hear the sounds of training. He opened the door, slightly peeked inside and wondered who was training there at such a late hour. He saw Book striking a dummy with particular passion, and he thought in surprise, Book. At that moment, his future opponent noticed the door opening. Legion hid behind the door, covering his mouth. He wondered if he'd imagined it. Why was he training at such a late hour? Putting his hand to his head, he muttered. He must have mistaken him for someone else, apparently. He'd lost his mind while practicing his breathing technique. And that's why the Demonic Cult Instructor Returns is so entertaining. Because watching a legendary demonic master deal with weak students is like watching a tiger babysit house cats. If you enjoyed the video, hit like, subscribe, and comment which manhwa teacher would absolutely traumatize an entire classroom the fastest.